Chapter 450. Without Cecilia and her group of burdens, Han Shua galloped towards the depths of the Tarag Canyon. Along the way, more and more magical beasts swarmed past him, and high-level magical beasts could be seen everywhere. However, when Han Shua arrived at the area where the mystical demons had stopped, he could no longer see a single magical beast. There was a strange smell in that area where no magical elements could be sensed, giving off an extremely fishy feeling. After surveying his surroundings, Han Shua saw tens of thousands of footprints of magical beasts. Apart from that, there wasn't much useful information. Previously, his consciousness had sensed several powerful auras inside, which made Han Shua understand that the people inside had the strength to threaten his life. However, without any burdens around him, Han Shua believed that with his current strength, even if he couldn't deal with the people inside, as long as he wasn't surrounded, it shouldn't be too much of a problem for him to escape unscathed. It was precisely because of this confidence that Han Shua dared to venture deep into the canyon alone. He didn't stay outside for long. That bizarre power that could keep out the mystical demons didn't have much effect on an expert of Han Shua's level. With the sway of his body, Han Shua easily passed through the liquid-like defense and entered. Following the senses of his consciousness, he continued to venture deeper. Not long after Han Shua entered, the state preceptor of the Verdun Imperial Court, Stadtholm, also arrived at the area where Han Shua was standing. The old monster, Stadtholm, had been muttering to himself along the way, only stopping when he arrived at the spot where Han Shua had just stood. With a soft sound, the old demon clearly sensed a power that could stop an ordinary person. With a wave of his hand, his elegant left hand gently pressed against the void, as if he was pushing open an invisible door. Soon after, his ghost-like body drifted in, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Not long after the old monster, Stadtholm, arrived a skinny old man with two long white eyebrows that extended to his neck. At the periphery of that area, a bolt of lightning pierced through the invisible defense like a sharp sword, allowing him to barge in. Immediately after, a graceful and dignified lady, her body wrapped in layers of misty water vapor, also easily passed through the defense and entered. One after another, the four of them ventured deep into that strange area. Behind them, several other adventurer teams and experts who believed themselves to be strong also arrived. They were similarly filled with great curiosity about the situation inside. However, they were forcibly blocked by that strange defense. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't break through the defense and could only sigh helplessly. Han Shua, who was the first to enter, carefully concealed the aura on his body. His immense consciousness switched from overflowing to retracting. Instead of charging straight in like before, he first enveloped his own body, then used the shadows of some towering trees as hiding spots and unhurriedly ventured deeper. This was a space devoid of elemental energy. Even the oxygen was very thin. Using his exquisite control over his physical body, Han Shua closed all the pores on his body. His heartbeat and breathing stopped at the same time, and his demonic yuan slowly circulated around the demonic infant. With this, unless one could see Han Shua with their own eyes, even those with great strength would not be able to detect Han Shua's presence with their astonishing perception. The path was littered with the severed limbs of magical beasts, and the blood of magical beasts of various colors spilled all over the ground. Judging from the severed limbs, the magical beasts that had died in this area were all high-level magical beasts of the second rank and above. Severed limbs of high-level magical beasts, like giant dragons, could also be seen everywhere. Without thinking too much, Han Shua immediately understood that the tragic deaths of these high-level magical beasts were the reason why all the magical beasts in the depths of Tarag Canyon were frantically fleeing. Without the tragic deaths of so many high-level magical beasts, the magical beasts that had always resided in the depths of Tarag Canyon would not have left this place at all costs. What exactly happened in there? Han Shua grew even more curious. Relying on the trees and shrubs as natural cover, Han Shua walked unhurriedly for more than 10 minutes before he finally reached the depths of Tarag Canyon. Then, a large, clear lake came into Han Shua's sight. The lake was as flat as a mirror, and the water was clean, without a single ripple. However, the surroundings of the large, dark blue lake were littered with the corpses of high-level magical beasts. These magical beasts had died horribly, and not a single corpse was left intact. The large lake in the center was quiet and clear. The dark blue lake was like a large flat sapphire, emitting resplendent colors under the gentle rays of the sun. However, the appearance of this beautiful lake and the many corpses of high-level magical beasts by the lakeside gave off an extremely jarring and awkward feeling. Han Shuo hid in the luxuriant foliage of a large tree. He narrowed his eyes and looked down at the large lake in the distance. In the center of the large, dark blue lake, there was a small, flat island. Many humanoid creatures that Han Shuo had never seen before stood densely around the island. Each and every one of them had solemn expressions on their faces and were worshipping a tall, pointy structure that looked like an altar in the center of the island. If it weren't for their light green skin, if it weren't for their tails that resembled pythons, if it weren't for the sharp horns growing from their foreheads to the nape of their necks, Han Shuo might have mistaken them for humans. However, with these three characteristics, Han Shuo would never treat them as humans no matter what. Strange buzzing sounds that sounded like gulls came from the mouths of these humanoids as they kowtowed to the tall, pointy altar at the center of the island. This altar was somewhat similar to the magic towers that mages often used. On the pointy altar, there were many smelly hearts of magical beasts, as well as bright and clean magical beast cores. 4 of these humanoid creatures, who had a row of 5 sharp horns growing from their foreheads to the nape of their necks, stood at the 4 corners of the altar like leaders. They spoke in a strange language that resembled the buzzing of insects as they threw hundreds of magical beast hearts and magical beast cores into a large, headless, and disgusting mouth covered in thick mucus at the center of the altar. The 4 creatures with 5 sharp horns on their heads were the experts that Han Shuo had sensed earlier. After coming into close contact with them, Han Shuo could sense their terrifying auras even if he didn't use his divine sense to probe them. If there was only one of these 4 creatures, Han Shuo was confident that he could deal with it. However, if all 4 of them attacked together, Han Shuo could only flee in panic. After observing for a while, Han Shuo soon discovered that the strength of these creatures was completely determined by the number of sharp horns on their heads. Among these creatures on the island, the 4 fellows with 5 sharp horns on their heads were the most terrifying. Around the altar under their feet, there were more than 10 creatures with 4 sharp horns on their heads, and they were the closest to the altar. The further away from the altar, the fewer the sharp horns on the heads of the creatures kowtowing there. Those creatures at the outermost edge only had 1 sharp horn. Suddenly, an extremely familiar thing attracted Han Shuo's attention. At the top of the pointed altar, suddenly, a few tentacle-like fleshy limbs slowly lifted up 12 fist-sized spheres. One of the spheres emitted a pure aura of death that made Han Shuo's heart beat faster. Han Shuo had never thought that the aura of death could be so pure and without any impurities. As long as there were living creatures on the material plane, there would be birth, aging, sickness, and death. This was the most natural thing in the world. As long as someone died, this material plane would definitely have the presence of the element of death. However, any creature would have some messy emotions when they died, such as fear, anger, unwillingness, resentment, and so on. It was precisely because of these emotions that the element of death on any material plane would not be pure and free of impurities. Even in the netherworld where Little Skull came from, the element of death was also mixed with too many messy impurities. However, from that sphere, Han Shuo could feel the purest, clearest element of death without any impurities. Moreover, this element of death was very large. For a necromancer like Han Shuo, it had an irresistible temptation. Instinctively, Han Shuo felt that the sphere could bring him great benefits. If not for Han Shuo's exquisite control over his physical body, his heart would have started to beat faster due to excitement. The surprised Han Shuo was a little excited. As he focused his attention on the sphere with the pure element of death, Han Shuo also began to use his consciousness to carefully and slowly observe the other 11 spheres. With this observation, Han Shuo was once again shocked. Among the other 11 spheres, 7 contained the same pure elemental energy as the element of death. They were light, dark, wind, fire, water, electricity, and earth respectively. Among the remaining 4 spheres, although they did not contain pure elemental energy, they still contained strange energies. One of them contained the extremely rare energy of destruction. Another sphere seemed to be condensed from combat aura, constantly emitting the light of combat aura that ranged from dark blue to golden. The last 2 spheres were even more strange. Their insides seemed to be flowing like stars. Han Shuo tried his best to sense them, and only then did he feel some of the strange aura of a space summoner. There were a total of 12 spheres, all of them a dull brown color. From afar, they looked ordinary. However, only a person of Han Shuo's level could understand the different and mysterious energies contained within them. Chapter 451. 12 spheres appeared in the center of the altar. This area, which was originally devoid of any elements, was suddenly filled with extremely dense elements of various elements. The 4 humanoid creatures with 5 horns on their heads on the altar quickly threw a large number of hearts and crystal cores of magical beasts into the center of the wide open mouth. Nearly 1,000 of these creatures were worshipping below the altar. Their pale green eyes were filled with excitement. Just like those religious fanatics that Han Shuo had seen before, they had a kind of paranoid, unreasonable madness. Their green-skinned bodies trembled slightly, and their buzzing sounds gradually grew louder. Hiding in the lush foliage of a large tree, Han Shuo could clearly see everything that was happening in the great lake in front of him. Han Shuo's heart was filled with uncontrollable greed towards that sphere that emitted the pure element of death. However, Han Shuo did not dare to act blindly without thinking. Each of the 4 strange creatures with 5 horns on their heads had an aura as frightening as that of the ancient lizard king, a demigod existence. If these 4 creatures were to join hands and form an encirclement, even Han Shuo had no confidence in escaping. With eyes sparkling with greed, Han Shuo stared unwaveringly at the sphere that was filled with the rich element of death. His brain started to churn as he thought of a way to obtain that sphere. Suddenly, his consciousness sensed 3 equally powerful auras. The appearance of these 3 slowly approaching presences caused Han Shuo's eyes to light up. Han Shuo, who had been carefully concealing himself all along, gradually approached the 3 presences and stealthily released a strand of aura that would be hard for an average person to detect. As expected, the strand of aura that Han Shuo had deliberately leaked was immediately sensed by the 3 experts. With Han Shuo as the center, the 3 presences converged in an extremely short period of time. In the blink of an eye, the 3 mighty existences from profound continent that had entered the lake one after another suddenly froze not far from Han Shuo. "Oh, it's you, old monster!" The old man with long eyebrows that extended to his neck suddenly exclaimed as soon as he arrived. He looked at the former state preceptor of the Verdun dynasty, Stadholm, with some astonishment. "Reynolds, you little fellow, you're not dead yet." "Hoo-hoo, very good, very good." The handsome and somewhat bewitching Stadholm's mouth curved into a cheerful smile as he teased the thunder sacred magus of the Brute Merchant Alliance. "Stadholm, long time no see." The dignified lady who was shrouded in a thin layer of mist was the last to arrive. She glanced at Stadholm and greeted him softly. "Sister Tiana." Old Monster Stadholm bowed to the noblewoman who was shrouded in mist from afar and said with a smile, "This is—" The noblewoman called Tiana nodded her head in greeting to the old monster. Soon after, she looked suspiciously at the smiling Han Shuo and asked, "Hee, I'm just a nobody." "Yes, I'm from Lancelot Empire." Han Shuo gracefully bowed to the 3, but his heart was filled with astonishment. He didn't expect that the old man with long eyebrows that extended to his neck was the thunder sacred magus of the Brute Merchant Alliance, Reynolds Dyla. As a high-ranking member of the Dark Mantle, Han Shuo knew how great the prestige of this old man was in the Brute Merchant Alliance. Even the leaders of the several large merchant guilds that made up the Brute Merchant Alliance had to be respectful when they saw this old man. They absolutely wouldn't dare to be impudent in front of him. However, Among the three, such a character was the weakest in strength. Compared to Stadholm the old monster and the noblewoman called Tiana, Reynolds, this Thunder's sacred magus, was really lacking by quite a bit. No matter how powerful Reynolds was in the sacred realm, he was only a sacred expert. However, from the noblewoman called Tiana and Stadholm the old monster, Han Shua sensed the frightening aura of a demigod expert. The thunderous name of Stadholm the old monster was something that Han Shua had heard countless times. The fact that this old pervert, who had been the state preceptor of the Verdun dynasty 100 years ago, was able to break through to the demigod realm was enough to show how frightening his strength was. However, Stadholm the old monster, whose age absolutely didn't match his appearance, had addressed the noblewoman as Big Sister Tiana. Han Shua could be considered a high-ranking member of the Dark Mantle, but he still didn't know who this noblewoman was. He only knew from the way Stadholm addressed her that this woman should be a bit older than Stadholm. Lancelot Empire? When did such a young expert appear in the Lancelot Empire? Tiana was somewhat astonished. She looked at Stadholm, the old monster, and Thunder, sacred magus Reynolds in confusion. Brian? You're the city lord of Brettel City, Brian? Stadholm frowned at first, but soon came to a sudden realization. His eyes suddenly burst with a brilliant light, shining directly on Han Shua's body. That's right, Han Shua calmly admitted. No wonder. It looks like the rumors are credible. I've always thought that the Lancelot Empire was exaggerating to be able to force two sacred rank experts to retreat. Now it looks like it's true. The old monster nodded. Thunder Sacred Magus Reynolds of the Brute Merchant Alliance also focused his attention on Han Shua when he heard Han Shua admit his identity. He carefully sized up Han Shua a few times and said with a strange expression, "So it's you. A very bold young man. Interesting. All right, let's cut the nonsense. You should have seen the situation up ahead. We don't need to worry about the ins and outs of the matter for the time being. However, I think everyone should know what those 12 spheres are. Each of those 4 fellows with 5 horns on their heads possesses the strength of a demigod. None of the 4 of us have any hope of succeeding if we go alone. Are any of you interested in joining forces?" The upper-class lady Tiana interrupted. Of course, and the sooner the better. Stadholm the old monster was the first to agree. The lightning sacred magus of the Brute Merchant Alliance, Reynolds, not only immediately nodded in agreement, but also added, "I understand my own abilities. I only ask for that one origin crystal of thunder out of these 12 spheres, and I'll be responsible for the aftermath." All right, after the matter is done, the origin crystal of thunder is yours. Both of you. We'll divide the rest of the loot after we get it, and distribute it according to how much effort we put in. Do you have any objections? Tiana looked at the old monster and Han Shua, taking it for granted that Han Shua would agree. She asked solemnly, "I have no objections. I believe Big Sister Tiana will arrange it well." Stadholm shrugged his shoulders and replied easily. Soon after, he looked at Han Shua and asked, "What about you?" Han Shua indeed had the intention of joining hands with them. However, it seemed that all 3 of them knew the purpose of those spheres. Only Han Shua, although he could sense the pure energy nurtured within them, didn't know what the 12 spheres were used for. Therefore, under Stadholm's inquiry, Han Shua awkwardly asked, I have no objections either. It's just that, seniors, what exactly are those 12 spheres?" The 3 of them were stunned at the same time. They looked strangely at Han Shua. Stadholm stared blankly for a while before he smiled and said, "You don't know?" Nodding his head, Han Shua honestly admitted, "I really don't know. When the origin crystal of element fuses with the soul of a magus, it can transform the soul into a soul of element. This will increase the magus affinity with the elements between heaven and earth by 100-fold, allowing them to reach the most tacit understanding of the elemental energy of that element. A magus who has formed a soul of element can cast magic instantaneously, speeding up the magus comprehension of the elemental energy of that element. Yes, in short, the benefits are too great to list." Stadholm, the old monster, quickly explained to Han Shua. Most importantly, only a magus who has formed a soul of element has the qualifications to become a god in that element of magic. The soul of element and the body of element are the foundations for a magus to become a god. The upper-class Lady Tiana added to Statholm the old monster with a solemn expression. Thunder's sacred magus Reynolds' eyes shone brightly as soon as Tiana's words fell. Tiny bolts of lightning seemed to be shooting out from his pupils. Chapter 452. As soon as Tiana took out the azure magic staff, the water element in the area that had once again thickened suddenly came alive. The originally dry air was filled with moist water vapor, and the hazy water vapor that had been lingering around Tiana became even more misty. Reynold is in charge of those aliens on the periphery. You two go closer and retrieve the origin crystal. I'll help you from the periphery with magic. Tiana took on the role of commander without any hesitation. The magic staff in her hand had already begun rapidly absorbing the dense water element in the area. Let's go. Statholm the old monster shouted in a low voice. A plain and unadorned long sword about 2 fingers wide appeared in his hand. As soon as he finished speaking, he had already flown 100 meters away, charging straight at those aliens who were conducting some sort of evil ritual. Han Shuo was empty-handed. As soon as he saw Statholm make his move, he transformed into a streak of black lightning and followed closely behind Statholm. While he was in the air, Han Shuo's fingernails grew wildly. In the blink of an eye, they had grown to 1 meter long. The terrifying fingernails shone with the luster of a sharp blade. Demonic arts like demonic blades could only be practiced when one had reached the carnal realm, because only when one's demonic body had reached this realm would one be able to stimulate the growth of demonic claws. However, those of the demonic school naturally wouldn't call their crazily growing fingernails claws, hence the name demonic blades. After the fingernails grew to 1 meter long and were imbued with pure demonic yuan, the demonic blades formed truly had the sharpness of a sharp blade. They were even sharper than the average divine weapon. The name demonic blades was well-deserved. From a distance, Han Shuo looked like he was holding 10 sharp, gleaming blades. Statholm the old monster took the time to glance behind him and was startled by the bizarre transformation of Han Shuo's hands. He thought to himself, is this kid even human? How can his fingernails be sharper than the edge of a blade? Buzz buzz. The aliens who were conducting some sort of evil ritual immediately sensed the impending danger. An ear-piercing sound suddenly resounded through the sky. If it weren't for the fact that Han Shuo and the other 3 were true experts, ordinary people like Cecilia would have ruptured their eardrums just from the buzz-buzz. You take the left, I'll take the right. Charge. Statholm the old monster bellowed. His handsome face had an unhealthy shade of ashen. Before Han Shuo could agree, the old monster's speed suddenly multiplied. In the blink of an eye, he streaked across the surface of the Great Lake and landed on the island filled with aliens. Statholm swung the long sword in his hand. His formless fighting aura burst forth like a flood. The dozen or so aliens that were closest to Statholm suddenly exploded when they were still 3 meters away from him. Swordsmen and knights would have different colors once they obtained fighting aura. From the light blue of a trainee swordsman to the golden yellow of a sacred swordsman, they were all different. Legend has it that only experts who had broken through to sacred swordsmen would be able to return to their original state and make their fighting aura colorless and formless. This Statholm before him was clearly a true expert who had broken through to the sacred swordsman realm. If it wasn't for Han Shuo's powerful consciousness that allowed him to constantly pay attention to Statholm's movements, he might not have been able to detect the extremely terrifying formless and formless fighting aura condensed in his longsword. This kind of formless fighting aura contained a frightening power that would give anyone a headache in battle. Powerful indeed. He was indeed a genuine demigod expert. No wonder sacred swordsman Karel and Dempus were defeated with their tails between their legs. After witnessing the old monster Statholm's attacks, Han Shuo inwardly came to a conclusion. While observing Statholm, Han Shuo's own movements weren't slow at all. When Statholm swept out with his sword, Han Shuo had also fallen into the group of aliens on the other side. Close to 100 aliens with 1 or 2 horns on their heads, green skin, and python tails fixed their ice-cold and emotionless green eyes on Han Shuo's body. Dozens of aliens had already charged over. Hee, This demonic technique of the demonic blades. I'll use you guys to try it out. Han Shuo sneered and muttered to himself in a low voice. His hands that were as sharp as blades suddenly intersected and danced at high speed. Streaks of dazzling rays of light flashed and Han Shuo swept forward amidst his sneer. The dozens of aliens surrounding him seemed to have been sliced by a sharp weapon at high speed. Their bodies that were dashing towards Han Shuo suddenly split into pieces. Some of the aliens still maintained their running motions, but their heads and half of their bodies suddenly flew out. The dozens of aliens turned into broken limbs in the blink of an eye. Perhaps it was because the demonic blades were swung too quickly by Han Shuo, or perhaps it was because the demonic blades were too sharp, but these aliens didn't even let out a scream. There wasn't even a hint of pain on their faces. In the blink of an eye, all of them had turned into broken limbs, as if an invisible sharp weapon was constantly whirling around Han Shuo as he dashed towards the center of the small island. The bodies of the aliens surrounding him strangely split into pieces. Not a single one of them could even get within 3 meters of Han Shuo. Lightning's sacred Magus Reynold, who had just released a large-scale lightning magic, had an ugly expression on his face. He said in a low voice, "What a terrifying kid. No wonder Bretel City dares to be so presumptuous." As soon as Reynolds' words fell, dense elements of lightning suddenly converged from all directions. Under the clear sky, hundreds and thousands of lightning bolts the size of an infant's arm intertwined in the air like dragons and snakes, accompanied by the rumbling of thunder. All of them smashed towards the island at the center of the Great Lake. Han Shuo had finally experienced how frightening the magic of a sacred magus was. Hundreds and thousands of lightning bolts struck, as if a thunderstorm had fallen from the clear sky. The sky was filled with frightening lightning bolts of varying thicknesses. Although Reynolds' target was only the island at the center of the Great Lake, the area covered by the lightning omnipresent magic was obviously not limited to that. Under the intertwining of the lightning, the clear blue lake suddenly turned into a sea of electricity. The rumbling thunder completely shattered the tranquility of the Great Lake. Columns of water mixed with the power of lightning soared into the sky. These water columns were extremely turbid, having been blasted out from the deepest part of the lake by the lightning power. Strands of lightning power flooded the Great Lake. There were also some small fishes and shrimps that couldn't even be considered as magical beasts. All of them floated to the surface with their bellies turned white and dead. The outer perimeter was already so frightening. Naturally, the aliens on the island, who were the main target, were in an even more tragic state. Lightning bolts as thick as an infant's arm struck down densely, leaving almost no gaps between them. After the lightning power entered the bodies of the aliens, all of them collapsed with thick black smoke rising from their bodies. Under the attack of the lightning power, not a single one of the aliens with 3 horns or less survived. The 3-horned aliens were trembling uncontrollably. They should have suffered serious injuries. Only the 4-horned alien was unscathed. Their green eyes locked onto Statholm and Han Shuo, preparing to gang up on the two. Before the lightning bolts from the 4 5-horned alien leaders could approach them, they were already destroyed by the energy they emitted. They couldn't cause any injuries at all. Of the 4 alien leaders, 2 remained where they were, continuing to maintain the operation of the altar. The other 2 slowly rose into the air and gradually moved towards Statholm and Han Shuo. As the main attackers, Han Shuo and Statholm naturally wouldn't be affected by this kind of large-scale lightning magic. They continued to charge towards the altar with unstoppable momentum. The aliens with 1 or 2 horns on their heads didn't have any opportunity to attack Han Shuo and Statholm. Under the attacks of the 2, they could only be slaughtered. The aliens with 3 horns on their heads could already make use of their high speed and the defensive strength of their bodies to barely block the attacks of the 2. However, they still couldn't stop the 2 from charging forward. However, the aliens with 4 horns on their heads could already fly high in the sky. More than a dozen of these aliens separately surrounded Han Shuo and Statholm. Even the sharp longswords and weapons in Statholm's and Han Shuo's hands could only leave bloody marks on their bodies. They couldn't kill them as easily as before. Although the aliens with 4 horns on their heads were a bit weaker than the human sacred swordsmen, the difference wasn't too great. Even Han Shuo and Stadholm were temporarily trapped by these terrifying aliens with 4 horns on their heads. What was even more frightening was that 2 of the alien leaders with 5 horns on their heads had already walked down from the altar. Han Shuo had long been aware of the strength of these 2 alien leaders. Their green eyes were cold and devoid of any human emotion. As they approached, a destructive aura began to madly converge on their bodies. Elder Sister Tiana, we can start now. Suddenly, the old monster Stadholm yelled loudly. Hold on for 2 minutes. We'll be done soon. Tiana's response came from an unknown distance away. Han Shuo could feel the temperature of the entire space rapidly cooling down. The great lake below, which had been raging just a moment ago, had actually turned into a thick layer of ice at some unknown time. Lightning and thunder still crashed down from the sky from time to time, but they couldn't break through the thick layer of ice. What was more shocking was that the surrounding temperature was still plummeting. There didn't seem to be a shred of warmth between heaven and earth other than a bone-chilling cold. Chapter 453. The moment the 2 5-horned aliens landed, Han Shuo immediately felt a heavy pressure bearing down on him. One of them soared into the air and flew towards Han Shuo. The 5 horns on his head shot out a cold, dark green light at the same time. From afar, the horns on his head looked like 5 emeralds. Before Han Shuo could react, he suddenly felt 5 mysterious forces fiercely stabbing into his divine sense. The 5 forces were like sharp awls, immediately bringing an indescribable pain to Han Shuo. It was as if his divine sense had suffered a heavy blow. The spinning demonic blades in Han Shuo's hands suddenly came to a halt. The 7 4-horned aliens who had been surrounding Han Shuo swiftly surrounded him. The horns on their heads also lit up with a dark green light. In an instant, 28 mysterious forces frantically surged into Han Shuo's divine sense. Within Han Shuo's divine sense, there were suddenly another 28 weaker soul attacks. A splitting headache. This was the most intuitive feeling. The intense pain even caused Han Shuo to temporarily feel dizzy and hallucinate. The mysterious soul attacks were very simple, but they brought a pain that felt like blades were twisting and turning in one's mind. Many years of cultivation in demonic arts had caused Han Shuo's pain tolerance to reach a perverse level. The demonic arts had caused Han Shuo's soul to evolve into a high-level divine sense. This allowed his divine sense to possess unimaginable tenacity and miraculousness. His daily frenzied tempering of his physical body and the unbearable pain torture caused the sudden burst of pain in his mind. The resulting dizziness only lasted for 2 seconds. 2 seconds later, the blood essence in his demonic infant suddenly boiled. Han Shuo's divine sense instantly obtained boundless power. Suddenly, the divine sense in his mind strangely disintegrated into thousands of strands. The attack on Han Shuo's divine sense suddenly lost its target. In the next moment, Han Shuo's divine sense that had been scattered into thousands of strands reassembled at the demonic infant. His divine sense reappeared. Sensing the reappearance of the divine sense, a total of 33 soul attacks reacted. However, before they could attack again, the divine sense that had fused with the demonic infant suddenly formed an extremely fierce suction force. The demonic art of assimilation began to circulate wildly, and the all-devouring attribute of a demonic cultivator began to surge wildly with the demonic infant as the foundation. All the attacks that were aimed at Han Shuo's divine sense didn't even have time to withdraw from Han Shuo's body before the 28 mysterious forces were all trapped by the suction force. Han Shuo's divine sense tightened. Like a whale sucking in water, the 28 soul-attacking forces all entered the demonic infant's small mouth. The green eyes of the 7 foreign tribe experts surrounding him turned from fear to dread. All of a sudden, the 7 foreign tribe experts moved away from Han Shuo in unison. Their bodies were covered in wounds, and the foul green blood flowed endlessly. Han Shuo was also stunned. He looked at the meter-long demonic blades with some astonishment. He couldn't understand why the demonic blades were suddenly able to inflict more damage on the 7 foreign tribe members. After thinking about it carefully, Han Shuo realized that the only difference between this attack and the previous one was that the demon infant had absorbed the strange energy from the 7 foreign tribe members' soul attacks. Could it be because the demon infant had absorbed the 28 mysterious energies of the foreign tribe members? Without waiting for Han Shuo to ponder deeply, the old monster Stadholm's shout came from not far away. "Hey, big sister Tiana, can you hurry up?" Han Shuo turned his head to look and suddenly discovered that Stadholm's body was slithering like a snake among the foreign tribe members. The lily embroidered at the corner of his robe, which was holding a long sword, was stained with green blood. Stadholm seemed to be a germaphobe, and he seemed extremely dissatisfied with the green blood splattered on the lily embroidery on his robe. As he slithered through the group of foreign tribe members, he brandished his sword and cut off the corner of his robe that was stained with green blood from time to time. At this critical moment of life and death, he didn't forget to keep his robe clean. Han Shuo didn't know whether to laugh or cry. However, although Stadholm seemed to be in a flurry, it was only because he was worried about the filth of the green-skinned foreign tribe members. After a careful look, Han Shuo couldn't help but sigh at how experienced and powerful the old monster Stadholm was. He didn't allow the 5-horned foreign tribe leader to get close to him. Instead, he circled around the 4-horned foreign tribe members that surrounded him, walking in a wondrous manner. From time to time, he would brandish his sword and strike, and a bloody hole would appear on the body of a foreign tribe member. The older, the wiser. This old monster is a cunning and seasoned opponent. Han Shuo inwardly judged Stadholm. All right, Tiana, the upper-class woman, who was hiding somewhere in the distance, shouted softly. Soon after, the bone-piercing coldness multiplied in the area. Strands of bone-piercing cold air swam like long dragons. Even the 4-horned foreign tribe members were immediately turned into ice sculptures when they were swept by the strands of cold air. Among them, 4 of the thickest cold air took shape in a flash and fiercely enveloped the 4 5-horned foreign tribe leaders on the island. 2 of them were on the altar, and the other 2 were below it. They were shrouded by 4 thick, bone-piercing cold air that Tiana had specially prepared for them. The 4 leaders, who were nearly a head taller than the average foreign tribe member, did not immediately turn into ice sculptures even under the 4 strands of cold air that could freeze space. However, they were still affected by the frightening cold air. Their bodies rapidly froze at a speed visible to the naked eye. The body of the foreign tribe leader that was chasing the old monster Stadholm creaked as it flew at high speed. His speed slowed down little by little, until he became as slow as a snail. It was obvious that his bodily functions had been largely frozen by the absolute cold air. Tiana unleashed a spell, and the world turned into a world of ice. The entire lake was completely frozen. The cold wind, the air, and the human figures seemed to all come to a standstill. Apart from the old monster Stadholm and Han Shuo, there was not a single living human figure, wind, or air. Han Shuo shuddered as well. He cursed inwardly. It's so damn cold. Looking at the 5-horned foreign tribe member in front of him, who was slowly twisting his body like a robot, Han Shuo could finally be sure that Tiana was a water divine magus. Otherwise, the bone-piercing cold air would not have been able to freeze this demigod-level foreign tribe member. Now, go get the thing. A loud shout suddenly came from Tiana's mouth. Her voice was mixed with a hint of unconcealable excitement. The origin crystal of water. Even though this water divine magus had lived for an unknown number of years and had hidden in the shadows of the continent for an unknown number of years, it still held an irresistible allure for her. Go! The old monster Stadholm roared. A new set of silver-gray robes embroidered with lilies replaced his original tattered robes. His eyes were filled with fervor as he stared at the orb that was endlessly circulating with the light of fighting aura. His body shot forward like a bolt of lightning. Han Shuo was not to be left behind. For the first time, he unleashed the art of the demonic ninth heavens at full force. Renaud and Tiana could not see his flight trajectory at all. When he reached the top of the altar, the illusory figure that was originally standing below the altar had yet to disappear from their eyes. Chapter 454. When Han Shuo and Stadholm, the old monster, arrived at the top of the altar, they stretched out their hands towards the 12 spheres propped up by the tentacles without any hesitation. Naturally, Stadholm, the old monster, first grabbed the sphere sparkling with the light of fighting aura. Han Shuo had long since set his sights on the sphere emitting the pure element of death. His body also happened to land in that area. As he stretched out his hand, the 1-meter-long fingernails of the demonic blades mysteriously shrank and disappeared. Just as Han Shuo's hand was about to land on the sphere, a sudden change occurred. The 12 tentacles that had been motionless all this time suddenly began to wriggle wildly. Han Shuo's outstretched hand actually missed. Stadholm cried out in surprise. His body suddenly spun at high speed, staring straight at the fighting aura sphere. His 2 hands turned into phantoms as he stared fixedly at the sphere. The 12 tendon-like tentacles wriggled like monsters. Thick green mist suddenly emerged from the center of the altar and spread to all corners of the island in a flash. Han Shuo shuddered. He suddenly had an extremely uneasy feeling. At the same time, the green skin of the 4 pint-horned aliens that had been frozen by Tiana's frigid aura made popping noises under the green mist. Their stiff bodies began to tremble with creaking noises. Their sluggish movements became faster and faster. The green eyes of the 2 alien leaders on the altar shone with cold light as they respectively stared at Han Shuo and Stadholm. "Quick, they've broken the seal." Tiana's voice was extremely anxious as she suddenly shouted from afar. Han Shuo was dumbfounded. His demonic yuan immediately circulated at the fastest speed he had ever circulated in his life. Just as the alien with the python tail on the altar was charging over, Han Shuo suddenly let out a loud cry. The 12 mystical demons that had been lurking in the surroundings in a state of nothingness suddenly solidified. Each and every one of them let out ferocious and terrifying shrieks as they lunged at the 12 spheres. Han Shuo didn't pay any attention to the alien who was shooting towards him at high speed. He raised his speed to the maximum and stared at the orb that was overflowing with pure death element. Vaguely, Han Shuo had a bad feeling. Although he was confident in the speed of the 12 mystical demons, the altar that was giving off a strange smell and the green mist that was suddenly spewing out made Han Shuo's heart palpitate. Therefore, he did not place all his hopes on the 12 mystical demons. His main body also acted without hesitation. Buzz! All of a sudden, an extremely frightening howl came from the mouth at the center of the altar, which was filled with viscous liquid. A chill that made people's hair stand on end instantly spread across the entire area. This sharp, sword-like howl carried an indestructible soul attack. Compared to the soul attack of the 5-horned alien leader, this one was more than 10 times more powerful. Han Shuo's consciousness was struck before it could completely disperse. The piercing pain exceeded any pain that Han Shuo had experienced over the years. The unbearable pain in his consciousness caused Han Shuo to immediately feel dizzy. In an instant, Han Shuo's mind was filled with illusions and his limbs were cold and powerless. With his consciousness severely injured, Han Shuo's body involuntarily plummeted from the sky. All of a sudden, Han Shuo, whose mind was filled with illusions, suddenly felt 12 kinds of light, stabbing pain in his consciousness at the same time. Of course, compared to the stabbing pain from the previous howl, this kind of pain was practically negligible. However, it was precisely because of these 12 stabbing pains in his consciousness that Han Shuo, who had been dazed and hallucinated by the howl aimed at him, suddenly woke up. His body no longer helplessly plummeted. In the next moment, Han Shuo understood that the 12 mystical demons he had painstakingly refined had all been annihilated. Even Han Shuo's consciousness would suffer heavy damage from the frightening howl mixed with the power of the soul attack. Naturally, the 12 mystical demons refined from his blood essence would not be able to escape this calamity. Having regained consciousness, Han Shuo hastily stopped his body. Suddenly, Han Shuo discovered that there were 3 spheres emitting different kinds of energy beside him. An origin crystal of the pure element of death, an origin crystal of the pure element of darkness, and a sphere brimming with the energy of destruction. Perhaps it was because the three spheres were treasures that only evil experts would willingly possess. They had been staying together all this time. When that dreadful howl sounded, the 12 muscles that were madly twisting stopped moving. Although Han Shua's consciousness had suffered a heavy blow and was on the verge of collapsing, he still managed to arrive in front of the three spheres by sheer willpower. Of course, the 12 mystical demons also played a part in this. If the death of the 12 mystical demons had not reflected the pain to him, the host, he most likely would have involuntarily fallen into the disgusting mouth at the center of the altar. Without any hesitation, Han Shua forcefully endured the discomfort in his head and took out the demon's lair edge that was still in hibernation. He used the sharpness of the demon's lair edge to cut off the three flesh tendons. The space ring flashed, and the flesh tendons holding the three spheres all fell into the ring. Only after the three spheres were successfully collected did Han Shua feel a little better from the pain of losing 12 mystical demons. With a quick glance, Han Shua saw an origin crystal of fire 10 meters away from him. Just as he was about to make a move to collect it, he suddenly heard the old monster Stadholm yell, "Run!" This loud yell from the old monster Stadholm was specifically directed at Han Shua. Han Shua immediately turned his head to look at the old monster Stadholm. He suddenly discovered that the old monster's silver-gray robe was already covered in fresh blood. The color of the blood was dark red. Blood flowed continuously from his 7 orifices. It seemed that the fresh blood on the new robe obviously came from the old monster himself. Stadholm's devilishly handsome demeanor was nowhere to be seen. His sorry state caused Han Shua to feel somewhat apprehensive. He didn't even bother to clean up the fresh blood on his body. He only stared at the disgusting mouth that had been continuously throwing magical beast cores and hearts into it. Following Stadholm's line of sight, Han Shua couldn't help but look down. He saw a large green head covered in sticky pus slowly squeezing out of the disgusting mouth. Han Shua could tell that this was the head of another green-skinned alien. This head was even larger than the 4 alien leaders. Most importantly, there were 6 sharp horns on his head. Aliens with only 5 horns already possessed terrifying strength comparable to demigods. Han Shua didn't dare to imagine just how frightening the strength of this alien with 6 horns on his head would be. Even with Han Shua's consciousness, he couldn't even sense the existence of this alien who had emerged. Based on Han Shua's understanding of demonic arts, he was certain that this alien's strength far exceeded anyone in this area. No wonder the old monster Stadholm was so afraid to leave. This alien that was about to emerge most likely had the strength of a true god. Go! This loud yell came from Tiana. When Tiana's voice rang out, Han Shua had already sensed that she was about to take action. Her aura was getting farther and farther away from this area. Go! The old monster yelled again. He turned a blind eye to the remaining origin crystals around him and flew away at a speed even faster than he had rushed over. Even with his heavily injured body, he was still able to display a speed even faster than when he had come. This was enough to show that he had overdrawn his strength to escape. My origin crystal of thunder! Reynolds' anguished and unwilling cry came from afar. He was jumping madly in the void, but Stadholm the old monster did not stop even for a moment because of him. Stadholm the old monster came to help him collect the origin crystal of thunder that was not far from him. At this point, Han Shua didn't hesitate at all. When the old monster Stadholm made his move, Han Shua also gathered all the strength in his body to escape. Finally, he turned his head to look regretfully at the remaining spheres. There were a total of 12 spheres. Han Shua had obtained 3, while the other 2 spheres brimming with fighting aura and pure water element had disappeared. They should have been successfully collected by the old monster Stadholm. The remaining 7 spheres, including the origin crystal of thunder, remained motionless. However, neither the old monster Stadholm nor Han Shua dared to stay and collect them. The 4 5-horned aliens were gathered at the place where the terrifying 6-horned alien had torn open the giant mouth. Strangely, they didn't chase after Han Shua and Stadholm. Instead, they joined forces to tear open the giant mouth and help the most terrifying 6-horned alien break free. My origin crystal! Thunder, sacred magus Reynold of the Brute Merchant Alliance stared fixedly at the origin crystal of thunder in the distance, jumping up and yelling loudly. "If you don't go, you'll die here." The old monster Stadholm vomited blood and came to Reynold's side. After saying these words, he fled in a panic, as if he didn't look at Reynold again. My. Origin crystal. Reynold suddenly stopped jumping up and down. However, he seemed to have turned silly as he stared blankly at the origin crystal emitting pure energy in the distance, muttering to himself. Han Shuo crossed the distance of 1,000 meters and arrived beside Reynold like lightning. Looking at the dumbfounded Reynold, Han Shuo didn't say a word and quickly followed behind Stadholm. Reynold was the Thunder Sacred Magus of the Brute Merchant Alliance. Han Shuo had the least favorable impression of the Brute Merchant Alliance. Reynold, who had always liked to meddle in the affairs of the Brute Merchant Alliance, might have even secretly attacked Bredel City before. In the future, he would definitely be Han Shuo's enemy. Naturally, Han Shuo wouldn't care whether he lived or died. Chapter 455. Very soon, Han Shuo caught up from behind and caught up with Stadholm the old monster and the water divine Magus Tiana. Just as the three of them reached the area where the defense had been penetrated, an incomparably terrifying aura instantly enveloped the entire space. A heavy, suffocating pressure immediately appeared. Han Shuo and the other two exchanged horrified looks. Suddenly, Stadholm the old monster yelled, "Oh no, he's coming out." Han Shuo and Tiana both understood who the old monster was talking about. Tiana's graceful and calm expression changed. She hastily extended her hand and pressed it against the space protected by the strange power. An icicle sparkling with cold light suddenly condensed in the palm of her hand. The dense water element within it was extremely frightening. She casually pierced it into the space of the defense. Creak. The icicle condensed by the water divine Magus felt as if it had stabbed into the hardest iron and stone in the world. The icicle rapidly shattered from head to tail. The hearts of the three suddenly sank. Old Monster Stadholm the old monster hastily asked, "Big Sister Tiana, what's wrong?" "The power has increased. I can't break through this defense." Tiana's voice carried a hint of panic. Her charming face turned somewhat ugly. Old Monster Stadholm's eyebrows shot up violently. He had been holding the longsword in his hand and had never put away his space ring. His colorless and formless fighting aura suddenly burst forth with an invincible aura. A dazzling white light flashed. Clang. Stadholm's attack, which he had gathered the rest of his strength to bombard the defensive space, also felt as if he had bombarded an unshakable iron and stone. Old Monster Stadholm's right arm trembled slightly as he retracted it. His face was aghast as he shouted in a panicked voice, "I can't break through it either." One of them used a magical attack, while the other used a physical attack. Both were to no avail. "That guy has come out. He's strengthened his defense. I'm afraid we can't break through this defense," Han Shuo said in a low voice as he looked at the two panicking demigod experts. He understood that the six-horned alien must have exerted his strength. Buzz. A strange whistling sound rang out from afar. It was different from the soul attack that was used against Han Shuo. This whistling sound had a strange effect, as though it could tear the sky apart. Ripples appeared in the sky, and colorful cracks appeared in the void. Stadholm the old monster and Tiana looked at each other and gasped at the same time. They stared at the colorful cracks in the void, their faces ugly to the extreme. Stadholm, who had just taken out a scroll, looked at Tiana, wanting to cry but having no tears to shed. He said, "The space undulations are too violent. There's no way to release space magic scrolls. This bastard has cut off all our hopes of escaping." At this point, even Tiana was at her wit's end. She shook her head and sighed, saying, "It looks like we're going to die here. Stadholm, I'm the one who got you into trouble this time. Who would have thought that an even more terrifying guy would show up?" Given the strength of the two demigods, they had no way to break through the defense shrouding the area with their own strength. They could only use the space magic scrolls, which were the best at preserving their lives, to tear through space and escape. However, The appearance of the sharp whistling sound caused the space to crack. Space magic scrolls were completely useless in the chaotic space. To them, there was indeed no hope of escaping. "I'll do it," Han Shuo, who had been quiet all along but had maintained his calm, suddenly said. The reason why Han Shuo had maintained a calm expression and mood from beginning to end was that Han Shuo still had a trump card. The two demigod experts' gazes instantly landed on Han Shuo. The old monster was dumbfounded and said, You have a way?" Without answering, Han Shuo chanted an incantation, and the simple-looking Earth elite zombie suddenly appeared. The old monster, Statholm, and Tiana suddenly looked at each other. Their eyes were filled with doubt, as though they had no idea what such a low-level zombie warrior could do at this time. However, something astonishing suddenly happened right under their noses. They saw the rather simple and honest zombie warrior suddenly melt into the earth as soon as he landed. The hard earth seemed to have no hindrance to him at all. His body rapidly disappeared. In this world, although Earth Magi could utilize the energy of the Earth, they could only utilize it for attack or defense. They couldn't be like the Earth Elite Zombie, who was the darling of the Earth, who could subtly utilize the energy of the Earth to travel as he pleased. Therefore, when the Earth Elite Zombie's body sank into the depths of the Earth like water, the two divine priests could only stare blankly at the unbelievable reality placed before them. They were unable to accept the absurdity of the situation, which caused them to be momentarily absent-minded. "Let's go," Han Shuo, who had already entered the depths of the tunnel, softly shouted at the two demigods. The two demigod existences' originally dumbfounded expressions were suddenly replaced by wild joy. They looked at each other and hastily leaped into the tunnel that the Earth Elite Zombie had opened up. Save me." Just as the three descended into the depths of the earth, Lightning's sacred Magus Reynolds' cries sounded from afar. His voice was filled with fear, as though he was rushing towards them at high speed. A heavy, suffocating pressure rapidly approached them from afar. Han Shuo, Tiana, and Tiana, who had just entered the tunnel, immediately understood what had happened. The six-horned alien had come out, and Reynolds was fleeing in their direction at high speed. He was probably being pursued by the alien experts. Han Shuo glanced at Statholm and Tiana, and discovered that the two were simultaneously creasing their brows, but with an extremely tacit understanding, they maintained their silence. Reynolds had been abandoned by the two. Han Shuo immediately understood. Naturally, Han Shuo knew what to do. He gave an order to the Earth Elite Zombie. The hole above the tunnel that the three had just entered was slowly sealed up by a thick layer of earth. When Statholm the old monster and Tiana saw the last ray of light vanish above their heads, they breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. It was as though a boulder had been lifted from their hearts, and their faces relaxed somewhat. In the darkness, Han Shuo could clearly see their expressions, and gained a deeper understanding of human nature. Every man for himself, and heaven and earth destroy. "Thank you, Brian. You are a miraculous young man." Statholm the old monster, who was following behind Han Shuo, suddenly said, "You're welcome. We're companions. It's what I should do." Han Shuo immediately replied in the darkness, but in his heart, he didn't think much of it. The reason why Han Shuo had brought the other two into the tunnel was because he couldn't be sure whether they would encounter even more terrifying dangers later on. Vaguely, Han Shuo could feel that it wouldn't be so easy to escape this time. With these two seasoned fellows by his side, the three of them might have a higher chance of escaping. That was why he selflessly brought them along. This time, Han Shuo and the other two had all obtained what they needed. Their strengths weren't too far apart, so they had a higher chance of escaping if they gathered together. As for Reynolds, his strength was a whole lot lower than the other three. He was no longer of any use at this time, so it was only natural that he would be abandoned. "Big Sister Tiana, here's your origin crystal of water." Statholm took out a ruby. As soon as the ruby was taken out, a faint, gentle red light appeared in the darkness. Statholm used the red light to pass the orb to Tiana. Turning his head to look behind him, Han Shuo saw an irrepressible excitement on Tiana's face. Her hand trembled as she held the orb. Her eyes sparkled as she murmured, "Origin crystal." I have an origin crystal. It would take some time to absorb the origin crystal. Although the three of them had all obtained what they needed during their escape, none of them had fused their souls with the origin crystal. Tiana had lived for who knew how many years. When the origin crystal fell into her space ring, the long years quickly calmed her excited emotions. She took a deep breath and looked at Han Shuo, who was leading the way. She asked, "How much longer until we can get out?" "Very soon, but I'm sure you can feel it too. Even in the depths of this earth, you can still feel that heavy pressure. I don't think we're truly safe yet." Han Shuo replied. Just 2 minutes after Han Shuo said those words, Earth Elite Zombie had already broken through the earth. A glaring light emerged from a hole in front of them. Shortly after, the three leapt out of the tunnel. Han Shuo looked around. Before he could clearly see where he was, his consciousness suddenly felt as though it was being locked on. It was an extremely bad feeling. Han Shuo immediately cried out in alarm. "He knows where we are." Although Statholm the old monster and Tiana didn't have as sensitive a perception as Han Shuo's consciousness, the suffocating pressure that had been enveloping them all along had yet to disappear. This made them immediately realize that what Han Shuo said was true. "Follow me. We'll talk as we go," Tiana hastily called out. The water vapor around her began to turn hazy again as she flew into the distance. Han Shuo and Statholm followed closely behind. "That six-horned tribal king of the soul race has locked onto our souls. As long as we are on Profound Continent, he will be able to find us. Their race is born with an extraordinary understanding of the soul. I'm sure you've experienced it yourself. There's no way we can break free from his soul lock," Tiana said to Han Shuo and Statholm the old monster as they ran. "Soul race? What race is that? How come I've never heard of it?" Han Shuo furrowed his brows. He maintained the same speed as the other two and hastily asked. "It's not a race from Profound Continent. However, they once appeared on Profound Continent a few thousand years ago. Then, they mysteriously vanished and have never appeared again. As for why they would appear in Tarag Canyon this time, I have no idea either. I learned some things about this race by accident from an ancient scroll. I have no way of knowing the specific secrets from thousands of years ago. It was from their appearance that I guessed they were soul race," Tiana explained to Han Shuo. As Tiana spoke, her bright eyes flickered for a moment. Han Shuo had a feeling that Tiana should know more about the soul race than this. However, since Tiana didn't say it explicitly, Han Shuo didn't press further. "Big Sister Tiana, could it be that this six-horned tribal king of the soul race has recognized our souls? Is there really nothing we can do but wait for him to find us and kill us?" Statholm the old monster was most concerned about his own safety and immediately asked about the main point. "That's not it either. We now have the origin crystal in our hands. As long as we fuse it with our souls and form a soul of element, even this six-horned tribal king of the soul race won't be able to sense the location of our souls. Once the soul of element is formed, we will fuse with the omnipresent elements between heaven and earth. Naturally, he won't be able to find us," Tiana explained. "However, to fuse the origin crystal into the soul, the time required is not something that can be done overnight. During this time, he can absolutely locate us according to the location of our souls and kill us one by one. What should we do?" Statholm forced a smile. He had the regret of obtaining a treasure but not being able to enjoy it. Han Shuo's heart jolted. He recalled that he could use the skeletal staff to descend his consciousness into the netherworld. Separated by an infinite distance of material planes, no matter how remarkable this six-horned tribal king of the soul race was, he most likely wouldn't be able to sense the location of his consciousness. In this way, Han Shuo could completely fuse the origin crystal in the netherworld first and avoid the pursuit of this terrifying existence. This was the safest method. Besides, Han Shuo's consciousness was different from Tiana Statholm's soul. When one's demonic arts reached a certain realm, the soul would evolve into an incomparably marvelous consciousness. Han Shuo believed that as long as he was given a bit of time, his consciousness would absolutely be able to find a way to break away from the six-horned soul race's detection. Han Shuo felt relieved when he thought of this. However, Han Shuo was still very curious about this soul race. He was not in a hurry to leave, but stayed here to continue listening to the conversation between Tiana and Statholm the old monster. We still have another way. Tiana had a strange look on her face as she glanced at Statholm the old monster mid-flight. What is it? The old monster asked hastily, his expression shaken. By utilizing the convenience of the transportation matrices of various nations, we can be a bit faster than them. If we can bring them to a place where they have the strength to contend with them, and have them fight against those terrifying existences on profound continent, perhaps we will have a chance to escape with our lives, Tiana said to Statholm after hesitating for a moment. The old monster's eyes abruptly lit up. He immediately understood Tiana's meaning and said, the existences on profound continent that can contend against that six-horned soul race can be counted on one hand. Moreover, most of them don't have a fixed residence. The only ones with a fixed location are the headquarters of the Church of Light and the Calamity Church. Han Shuo, who was about to leave, was startled at first, but soon after, he decisively said, the Church of Light it is then. Tiana and Statholm the old monster both had strange expressions on their faces. The two exchanged glances and remained silent for a while. In the end, they silently nodded their heads, agreeing to Han Shuo's proposal. The Church of Light, which had always exterminated heretics to the last man, had such an obviously evil race appear in their headquarters. Han Shuo believed that something interesting would happen. Chapter 456. After coming to a decision, the three shared the same goal and began their grand escape plan. Having lost his 12 mystical demons, Han Shuo's consciousness could sense all kinds of life energy within a certain range. However, he couldn't probe every nook and cranny as clearly as the mystical demons could. Fortunately, Tiana and the old monster were more familiar with this place. Han Shuo only needed to follow behind them. Along the way, Tiana and the old monster Statholm did not engage in any meaningful conversation. Han Shuo was also unable to obtain too much useful information. Since the two were unwilling to speak, Han Shuo naturally couldn't force them. However, he secretly had a plan in mind. The entire profound continent was vast, with numerous countries, mountains, and seas. Apart from humans, all kinds of races could be found everywhere. No one knew exactly how many strange and extraordinary people there were on this continent. However, from the previous conversation between Tiana and Statholm, Han Shuo was almost certain that even Tiana and Statholm, who possessed demigod strength, weren't the strongest existences on the profound continent. However, from what they said, Han Shuo also learned that there were only a few existences on the entire profound continent who were more frightening than them. Thinking about it, Han Shuo had never even heard of some demigod existences. Naturally, Han Shuo had no way of knowing more frightening existences. As the two most powerful religious organizations on the continent, the Church of Light and the Calamity Church were able to spread their influence to every region of the continent. This was enough to show how powerful they were on the profound continent. For these two religious organizations to be able to stand tall on the profound continent for 1,000 years without falling, it was likely that no one would believe that they didn't have any experts. It was reasonable for existences more powerful than Tiana and Statholm to be at the headquarters of these two churches. Elder Sister Tiana, no matter how I think about it, I still feel that it's a little inappropriate. When we arrive at the headquarters of the Church of Light in Odin Empire, we will certainly bring immeasurable losses to the Church of Light. After that, the Church of Light will certainly not let us off. What should we do? When they arrived at a brute merchant alliance city called Tujba, the three slowed down and landed. Old Monster Statholm asked Tiana, "There's nothing we can do. The Church of Light is quite close to here. Besides, the Church of Light has always been benevolent. I think they'll forgive us." She thought for a moment, then added, "Don't worry too much. The protector at the Church of Light's headquarters basically won't leave the headquarters. As long as we leave early after this, there shouldn't be any problems." "I'm relieved to hear that." Statholm the old monster nodded as if he had understood something. It was unknown if he was relieved that the benevolent Church of Light would not attack them, or that the protector of the Church of Light would not be able to leave the headquarters. Tujba City was not far from Tarik City. It was also a large city belonging to the Brute Merchant Alliance. The three of them quickly arrived at the teleportation array in Tujba City. Hansha frowned and said, "What do we do? Restrain the guards and force us to use the teleportation array?" The teleportation arrays of every country were not accessible to ordinary people. Only special people with clear identities could use these teleportation arrays that ordinary people could not use even if they had the money. No need. Stratholm, the old monster, smiled calmly. At some point in time, a sign appeared in his hand. He swaggered over to the person in charge of the magical transportation matrix, flashed the sign at them, and said, "We're going to Thea City." The person in charge of the Brute Merchant Alliance did not say a word. He respectfully opened the teleportation array and let the three of them enter. A white light flashed, and the three of them appeared in Thea City of the Brute Merchant Alliance. Stratholm, the old monster, who had lived for God knows how many years, had seen the rise and fall of every country. It was not surprising that he had some trump cards that allowed him to move unhindered across every country. After arriving at Thea City, the three of them heaved a sigh of relief and continued flying towards Odin Empire. Thea City of the Brute Merchant Alliance was the city closest to Odin Empire. The teleportation arrays of any two countries would not connect. The three of them had no choice but to continue flying. Fortunately, the three of them had temporarily shaken off the six-horned tribal king of the soul race by using the teleportation array. They were no longer as nervous and anxious as before. The three of them possessed demigod strength and could fly extremely fast. In less than half a day, they had entered the most powerful empire on profound continent, Odin Empire. After arriving at Odin Empire, Stratholm, the old monster, took out another token that represented a different identity and continued to use the teleportation array in Odin Empire without any hindrance. After 3 consecutive long-distance teleportations, the three of them finally appeared in the city closest to the headquarters of the Church of Light. This was a city named Sandro City in Odin Empire. After the three of them walked out from the teleportation array, they could see many temple knights and light priests of the Church of Light walking past them from time to time. The Church of Light had enormous influence in Odin Empire. This city, closest to the sacred mountain of the Church of Light, was jointly managed by the believers of both Odin Empire and the Church of Light. At a glance, Han Shuo discovered that the buildings here gave off a strong religious atmosphere. Churches of the Church of Light could be seen everywhere. The vast majority of the residents living in Sandro City were devout believers of the Church of Light. Many believers of the Church of Light on profound continent would travel thousands of miles to live in this city. They believed that this city was closest to the God of Light and could allow them to listen to the teachings of the God of Light at a closer distance. All right, that fellow will need at least a day to catch up to us. We can make use of this time to rest for a while. I have just sustained some serious injuries. Fortunately, we left in time, or else I would have been stuck there forever. Stratholm said to Han Shuo, and Han Shuo after walking out from the teleportation array. All right, let's find a place to rest first. Han Shuo immediately agreed. His consciousness had similarly sustained heavy injuries. In a day's time, that terrifying soul race tribesman would most likely be able to catch up to them. On top of that, this place was the headquarters of the Church of Light. Once Han Shuo's identity was exposed, the Church of Light would definitely not let him off. The more strength he could recover, the better his chances of escaping would be. The trio did not say anything further. Han Shuo concealed the aura on his body. Soon after, the trio found a remote inn and asked for 3 rooms that were right next to each other. The 6-horned tribal king of the soul race had memorized their souls. At present, the 3 were in the same boat and had a common enemy. However, Han Shuo was still very cautious. As soon as he entered his room, he deployed a demonic formation. As long as there was the slightest disturbance in the surroundings, Han Shuo would be able to react immediately. After everything was in place, Han Shuo sat cross-legged and began to activate the blood essence in his demonic infant to repair his severely damaged consciousness. The 6-horned tribal king let out a shrill howl. Han Shuo's consciousness was in agony, as though it was being scraped by thousands of sharp knives. Had it not been for Han Shuo's timely reaction to immediately divide his consciousness into thousands of strands and conceal it, it was very likely that his consciousness would have been directly destroyed. However, as long as his consciousness was not destroyed, he could use the blood essence in his demonic infant to activate the demonic yuan and reassemble his disintegrated consciousness. On the way to Sandro City, Han Shuo had already begun to do so. Now that he had calmed his mind and focused all his attention on activating his blood essence, the speed at which his consciousness recovered immediately increased. The soul consisted of 3 souls and 7 spirits. The 3 souls were the heaven soul, earth soul, and life soul, while the 7 spirits were the heaven soul, earth soul, and life soul. The first spirit was the heaven soul, the second spirit was the wisdom soul, the third spirit was the chi soul, the fourth spirit was the strength soul, the fifth spirit was the core, the sixth spirit was the essence, and the seventh spirit was the heroism. Among them, the 7 spirits were hidden within the body. As long as the 3 souls were not destroyed, the 7 spirits could be reassembled. The soul commonly referred to the 3 souls, heaven, earth, and life. Among the 3 souls, the life soul was the most important. As long as the life soul did not disperse, the soul would not disappear between heaven and earth. Han Shuo's demonic arts allowed the 3 souls, heaven, earth, and life, to fuse into one and form his consciousness. Not only did his consciousness possess marvelous abilities, but it could also be divided into thousands of strands and hidden within the 7 spirits. When the 6-horned tribal king launched a soul attack, Han Shuo's consciousness instantly separated and hid within the 7 spirits, thus escaping the calamity. An ordinary person's 3 souls needed to be attached to the 7 spirits to survive. In other words, once the physical body was destroyed, the 3 souls would cease to exist between heaven and earth. However, Han Shuo's consciousness did not have this limitation. Even if his physical body was pulverized and his 7 spirits were completely destroyed, his consciousness could still wander out and choose a new body to be reborn in. However, if he wanted to regain his original strength, he would have to spend another 100 years to refine his physical body. However, although the consciousness could not be destroyed even if the physical body was destroyed, it would still require the energy of the 7 spirits to recover once it was injured. Fortunately, the energy of the 7 spirits was hidden within the 7 chakras of the body, and demonic cultivators had top-notch control over their bodies. Using his blood essence to activate the demonic yuan, Han Shuo's consciousness unceasingly activated the energy of the 7 spirits within the 7 chakras. Strands of the energy of the 7 spirits fused into his consciousness, recovering his injured consciousness little by little. Under Han Shuo's all-out effort, the recovery process of his consciousness did not take up too much time. After the demonic infant consumed a dozen or so drops of blood essence, the energy of the 7 spirits was absorbed by his consciousness. With the replenishment of energy, the heavily injured Han Shuo's consciousness had completely recovered. When a demonic cultivator's consciousness was injured, as long as the physical body and demonic infant were not destroyed, it would not be difficult for them to recover. Chapter 457. Under the perception of Han Shuo's consciousness, Sandro City could be sensed by Han Shuo as long as the creature's strength was not higher than Han Shuo's. This was indeed the city closest to the sacred mountain of the Church of Light. Under the perception of Han Shuo's consciousness, there were believers of the Church of Light everywhere who carried divine energy. The entire Sandro City was filled with churches and numerous magical towers. A solemn and sacred energy filled every corner of the city. Wherever his consciousness passed, Han Shuo could sense experts appearing one after another. Han Shuo sensed the existence of a light sacred magus in Sandro City. Apart from this light sacred magus, all kinds of believers of the Church of Light could be found in every corner of the city. Among them, experts with profound strength could be found everywhere. As Han Shuo was slowly expanding his perception, he suddenly sensed a ripple-like divine energy coming from the sacred mountain of the Church of Light not far away from Sandro City. This divine energy that made one want to kneel and worship, it made one feel calm and willing to submit to it. Under the influence of this divine energy, even Han Shuo, who was brimming with killing intent, felt as though he had laid down his butcher's knife and become a Buddha. Indistinctly, a kind of energy that penetrated deep into one's soul also followed. This energy that penetrated deep into one's soul carried some kind of intense, bewitching power, making one feel as though they would forever kneel on the ground. Oomph! Han Shuo let out a light snort. Shortly after, he withdrew his consciousness that was spying on Sandro City, concealing the aura on his body. The divine energy coming from the sacred mountain of the Church of Light might have the effect of enhancing the divine energy of some devout believers of light. However, to ordinary people, this divine energy carried an intense, bewitching power, inducing them to throw themselves into the embrace of the Church of Light and treat the God of Light as their religion. As a heretic that the Church of Light was trying its best to eradicate, Han Shuo clearly understood what the bewitching power of this divine energy meant to the ordinary people. The Church of Light's actions were obviously not as open and aboveboard as they flaunted. After withdrawing their consciousness, the suffocating pressure that had been shrouding their bodies all along did not disappear. Starting from Tarag Canyon, the trio had traversed many cities along the way. However, the soul lock from the six-horned tribal king of the soul race never disappeared. By now, this suffocating pressure was growing stronger and stronger. Han Shuo could sense the soul race approaching rapidly. Ding! A crisp sound entered his ears. This was the warning sound of the demonic array. Only Han Shuo could hear it. Brian. The low voice came from the old monster, Stadholm. From the sound of the old monster's voice, his body should have recovered a little. He's here. Han Shuo answered and promptly removed the demonic formations around him. He opened the door and saw Stadholm and Tiana standing outside. He's coming. There was an unconcealable worry on the old monster's face. Even though he was prepared, the old monster was still worried that the future would not be optimistic when facing this terrifying six-horned tribal king. We need to get to the vicinity of the Church of Light's sacred mountain at once. When he's about to arrive, we will immediately break into the sacred mountain of the Church of Light and let the six-horned tribal king appear on the sacred mountain of the Church of Light. Only when the two of them are mutually wounded will we have a chance. Tiana was still as graceful and elegant as ever. It was just that her expression was grave, indicating that she was just like the old monster, Stadholm, full of worries. Very well, let's go. Han Shuo answered without hesitation. The old monster, Stadholm, and Tiana said no more. With Tiana leading the way, the trio quietly left Sandro City. The sacred mountain of the Church of Light pierced the clouds. When the trio arrived at the foot of the mountain, they raised their heads and gazed at the sacred mountain of the Church of Light that seemed to have pierced through the blue dome of heaven. A feeling of tranquility and peace spontaneously welled up in their hearts. This sacred mountain is 9,763 meters tall. On top of the sacred mountain lies the City of Light, which is protected by the most powerful experts of the Church of Light. We can first lurk halfway up the sacred mountain. When that six-horned tribal king is about to arrive, we will immediately rush to the peak of the sacred mountain. Tiana seemed to be very familiar with the sacred mountain of the Church of Light. When they arrived at the foot of the mountain, she looked up at the sacred mountain and explained to Han Shuo and Stadholm. Han Shuo and the old monster nodded at the same time. Tiana said no more. Seeing that the two understood, she led them and flew halfway up the sacred mountain of the Church of Light. Follow me. Let's find a place where we can hide first. There are many experts of the Church of Light on the sacred mountain. There are two people who have the same strength as us, a light divine magus and a divine knight. In addition, there's that ancient saintess who has lived for who knows how long. Only if our whereabouts are exposed, perhaps we will be finished off by the Church of Light before the six-horned tribal king arrives. Tiana explained to Han Shuo and the old monster as they flew toward the sacred mountain. All three of them were extremely powerful demigod existences. Even though the sacred mountain was more than 9,000 meters in height, the trio was able to reach halfway up the mountain in an extremely short amount of time. When they arrived at the headquarters of the Church of Light, Han Shuo withdrew his consciousness and merely used his eyes to size up everything around him. As far as his eyes could see, Han Shuo discovered that starting from the foot of the mountain, the sacred mountain was filled with the buildings of the Church of Light. Many of the Church of Light's followers lived on this majestic mountain. From the foot of the mountain to the mountainside, Han Shua saw many buildings. Tens of thousands of the Church of Light's followers lived on this sacred mountain. This way, Tiana shouted softly and led the two towards a precipitous cliff that jutted out halfway up the sacred mountain. This cliff jutted out from the mountainside, and behind it was a pitch-black cave. After Tiana landed on the cliff with Han Shua and the old monster, they walked straight towards the pitch-black cave. As soon as they entered the cave, Han Shua discovered that this pitch-black cave was not as gloomy as it appeared from the outside. On the contrary, there were a few magical lamps inside. The cave was extremely wide and was obviously artificially excavated. Elder Sister Tiana, you've been here before? Old Monster Stadholm said to Tiana in astonishment as soon as they entered. No, but I feel like there's no one living here. All right, we'll stay here for a while. I'll first release a spell to form a boundary to block our aura. Tiana replied casually. Han Shua and Stadholm did not ask any further. They watched as Tiana stood at the entrance of the only cave, took out her azure magic staff, and slowly chanted a magical incantation. Suddenly, just as Tiana finished her incantation, her body abruptly flew out of the only cave like a bolt of lightning. At the same time, the incantation finally fell from her mouth. Extremely dense water elements instantly enveloped the only cave entrance. The lively water elements quickly condensed, and before Han Shua and Stadholm could react, a 1-meter-thick chunk of ice blocked the only exit. Han Shua and Stadholm, the old monster's expressions immediately changed. Stadholm even roared, "Elder Sister Tiana, what's the meaning of this?" Two hallowed auras rushed down from the peak of the sacred mountain without concealment. Within a few breaths, they arrived beside Tiana outside the cave. Separated by the solid ice that was as transparent as crystal, Han Shua could tell that one of them was dressed as a light priest and the other as a temple knight. They both looked very young. The two people who flew down from the peak of the sacred mountain did not conceal their frightening auras. Han Shua could immediately tell that they were the light divine Magus and divine knight that Tiana had mentioned earlier. They were also demigod existences. Tiana, you've done well. You can stay on the sacred mountain and fuse with the origin crystal of water and peace. Our saintess will protect you from the persecution of that alien. The seemingly young temple knight said to Tiana with a gentle smile on his face. Bergson, that kid named Brian is the great heretic that you've been chasing. You can deal with him however you want. As for Stadholm, I think as long as he hands over the crystal ball that contains the origin of fighting aura, you can spare his life. He has no conflict with your Church of Light. Tiana could not bear to see this happen and pleaded on the old monster's behalf. I'm sorry, I can't make the decision on this matter. Let's talk about it after I report it to the saintess. The divine knight named Bergson shrugged his shoulders and said with a smile, however, if Stadholm is willing to swear fealty to the God of Light, then there will definitely be no problem. Han Shua and Stadholm suddenly sensed a dense divine energy that had shrouded the cave's surroundings at some unknown time. On top of that, Tiana had frozen the only exit. It seemed that the situation had reached its worst state. Elder Sister Tiana, I really didn't expect you to do this. The old monster, Stadholm, who was trapped inside, stared blankly at Tiana. His calm voice, however, carried an unconcealable fury. Stadholm, I'm very sorry. Bergson and I are very good friends. You just have to hand over that crystal ball of fighting aura, and I'll think of a way to let you walk out of this sacred mountain alive. There was not a trace of guilt on Tiana's face. She was still as graceful and elegant as ever. A frightening aura suddenly approached rapidly from afar. The strange buzzing whistle was so loud that Han Shua and Stadholm could hear it even though they were separated by layers of boundaries. At the same time, a melodious, gentle, and beautiful song rang out from the peak of the sacred mountain. A divine energy that only a god should possess fell in front of the cliff in an instant. Chapter 458. Han Shua and Stadholm the old monster glanced at each other. They immediately understood that the saintess of the Church of Light that Tiana had mentioned had arrived. The moment this expert, whom Tiana spoke of as possessing the true power of God, arrived in the area, Han Shua and Stadholm felt as though they were immediately shrouded by a kind of muddy, swamp-like power. Even moving seemed to be a little difficult. Domain of divinity. Both Han Shua and Stadholm the old monster were aghast. That kind of power that made them want to prostrate themselves in worship and made it difficult for them to move was the power that only a true God should possess. It was a kind of power that only a true God should possess, a power that mortals could not look directly at. Saintess. The two demigod existences of the Church of Light kowtowed at the same time, their faces expressing the respect from the bottom of their hearts. Greetings, Saintess. Even Tiana performed a solemn salute, her expression solemn and respectful. From Han Shua and Stadholm's point of view, they could not clearly see the appearance of the newcomer. However, that kind of divine aura that blotted out the sky and covered the earth was enough to move one's heart and soul. There seemed to be melodious singing praises of the God of Light mixed in with the divine aura, reverberating in the depths of their souls. This kind of voice had the divine power to bewitch people's hearts. Accompanied by the singing, Han Shua gradually lost the strength in his limbs. It was as though he was willing to throw himself into the embrace of the God of Light, to submit and never regret his allegiance. Not good. Han Shua's heart trembled as he realized what was going on. By now, Han Shua could be completely sure that the divine power from the sacred mountain that he had sensed in Sandro City previously came from this saintess of the Church of Light. It was only because of the distance last time, and the fact that the saintess' divine power covered the entire Sandro City, that Han Shua did not feel any discomfort. However, now that this powerful godlike existence was right in front of them, the holy aura that was naturally released from the domain might not be targeted at Han Shua and Wang Zhong, but because the range was reduced, the two of them still found it difficult to resist. Gradually, they felt the desire to sink into depravity. Many years of tempering his will using demonic arts had given Han Shua an incomparably firm heart. With an unshakable rebellious heart, Han Shua hid his consciousness within the demon's lair edge that was hibernating in his body. He used the demon's lair edge's endless desire to destroy to constantly stimulate his consciousness, allowing his consciousness to always remain clear and not sink into the domain of divinity. Get out. The old monster Stadholm unsheathed his long sword, and a formless fighting aura reverberated within the sword hilt, emitting a strange sound. It was used to resist the corrosive influence of this godly power. Stadholm's face was unprecedentedly solemn. His eyebrows were tightly furrowed, and even his breathing was a little unstable. It was obvious that he was using all his strength to resist. Buzz, buzz. The howl of the six-horned tribal king of the soul race suddenly seemed to envelop the entire sacred mountain. An ice-cold, deathly still aura, devoid of a single shred of humanity, filled every region like an indestructible ice blade. The howl of the soul race king, which was originally extremely unpleasant to the ears of Han Shua and Stadholm, suddenly became incomparably pleasing to the ears, because it was precisely because of the appearance of this howl that the saintess, whose appearance could not be clearly seen by Han Shua and Stadholm, released that divine energy that made one involuntarily want to sink into depravity, as if it was torn to shreds by a sharp sword, vanishing without a trace. What a terrifying power! The old monster Stadholm breathed a sigh of relief and exclaimed with lingering fear in his heart, "Stop the intruders first. We'll deal with these two after the soul race has left." A gentle and sweet voice suddenly sounded from outside the cave, separated by thick layers of ice. "Understood, Saintess." The three demigod existences, including Tiana, replied in unison. Whoosh! The green-skinned, python-tailed, six-horned tribal king of the soul race was the first to arrive at the cave entrance. As soon as this six-horned tribal king landed, the other four five-horned soul race tribesmen stood behind him in unison. There was no communication, not even any superfluous movements. A total of 5 soul race tribesmen, as soon as they arrived in this region, immediately attacked the few from the Church of Light who were blocking the cave entrance. A figure dressed in a snow-white robe suddenly appeared. It was the Saintess, dressed in a white priestly robe. When she met the six-horned tribal king head-on, only then did Han Shua and Stadholm finally see the Saintess whom they had been missing for a long time. It was a young and beautiful maiden. She had a pure, clean, and sweet smile on her face. Her appearance alone gave one a sense of flawless holiness. Coupled with the otherworldly temperament that was naturally released, it was as though this maiden was born to proclaim the holiness of the God of Light. Beautiful, holiness, and nobility. These were the most intuitive impressions that Han Shua had of her. Disregarding Han Shua's disgust towards the Church of Light, this beautiful young maiden seemed to have gathered all the advantages of a woman into one. Only the word perfect could barely describe such a flawless woman. The maiden who flew out from the side corner gracefully arrived before the six-horned tribal king. In her hand was a holy grail sparkling with dazzling holy radiance. Holy water was even gurgling within the holy grail. With a shake of the holy grail in her hand, an enormous force comparable to a mountain seemed to have enveloped the body of the six-horned tribal king. From the perspective of Han Shua and Stadholm, they discovered that the body of the six-horned tribal king was obviously swaying along with the Holy Grail. Soon after, a strange howl came out from the mouth of the six-horned tribal king. Like a dragon soaring into the sky, his enormous serpent tail fiercely stabbed at the Holy Grail in the Saintess' hand at lightning speed. Clang! A dreadful sound seemed to have enveloped the entire sacred mountain. An aftershock that was hard to see with the naked eye violently shot out. As though it had been bombarded by a high explosive, the protruding cliff was unable to withstand the force and shattered with a loud bang. Crushed rocks the size of fists rained down below. It was as though the sacred mountain, which was more than 9,000 meters tall, was quaking. The bodies of Han Shua and the old monster Stadholm, who were imprisoned in the center of the cave, swayed along with the tremors. At the same time, the four leaders of the soul race who came with the six-horned tribal king locked their inhuman green eyes on Tiana and the other two demigods. Almost as soon as the six-horned tribal king made his move, they had already begun to attack the three women. The sharp horns on their heads once again began to radiate with evil green light. Having suffered from it before, Han Shua immediately understood that it was an attack aimed at the soul. We should think of a way to leave. If we can't leave now, we won't have another chance. The old monster Stadholm hastily said to Han Shua, his eyes glistening as he observed the earth-shattering battle that was separated by a layer of solid ice. How could Han Shua not be aware of the dire situation they were in? The Saintess had added a layer of divine energy to the cave's defenses. Even the solid rocks contained divine energy. The solid ice boundary deployed by Tiana at the entrance was similarly reinforced by the Saintess' divine energy. Even Han Shua had a feeling that he was at his wit's end. I can only try Metal Elite Zombie. Having made up his mind, Han Shua immediately summoned Metal Elite Zombie. As soon as Metal Elite Zombie appeared from the netherworld, under Han Shua's command, he attempted to dig a passageway using his manipulation of the energy of metal and stone. Clang! Clang! An odd sound suddenly came from beneath his feet. Han Shua turned his attention and saw Metal Elite Zombie make a helpless gesture at him and transmit a message. The stones here have some strange impurities. Their properties have been altered. I can't open a passageway. That damn Tiana. Han Shua cursed loudly. His face turned somewhat unsightly. It seemed that no matter when, he couldn't reveal his trump card. Previously, when he left the six-horned tribal king of the soul race, Tiana had seen Han Shua use the Earth Elite Zombie to dig a passageway to escape. This time, Tiana must have told the Church of Light about Han Shua's miraculous abilities. That was why the Saintess of the Church of Light had even concealed divine energy within the stone mountain. Since they had even blocked the passageway, they obviously wouldn't give Han Shua and Tiana the opportunity to escape using a spatial magic scroll. Under the influence of the domain of two divine experts, even a sacred magus of space would find it hard to escape using the Edict of Space, let alone Han Shua and Stadholm, who only had a spatial magic scroll. There's no other way? Seeing that Han Shua's zombie warriors were ineffective and hearing Han Shua curse Tiana, Statholm the old monster immediately understood. His heart sank and Statholm felt a sense of helplessness. Shaking his head, Han Shua forced a smile and replied, "Tiana has sold us out. Even my trump card has been blocked." As he spoke, Han Shua's eyes were resolute. He had already started to ponder whether, or not, he should use the Omen blood disassembly to escape. Doing so might seriously injure Han Shua, but it was the only way out. "Father, are you going to blast open this cave?" It was at this moment that Metal Elite Zombies suddenly transmitted. "Yes, but it seems hopeless," Han Shua casually replied. In his mind, he was still considering whether or not to immediately use the Omen blood disassembly to escape. As soon as Han Shua finished those words, Metal Elite Zombie suddenly took out the golden cudgel he obtained from the place of extreme metal. While Han Shua wasn't paying attention, the metal attribute treasure had slowly and crazily grown, turning into a huge pillar that reached the sky. Chapter 459. As the golden cudgel crazily grew, dazzling golden light filled the entire cave. The dazzling golden light finally attracted Han Shua's attention. He saw that the golden cudgel in Metal Elite Zombie's hand was propped against the solid ice deployed by Water Divine Magus Tiana and reinforced by the Saintess. Naturally, the golden cudgel that had turned into a towering pillar wasn't something that Metal Elite Zombie could tightly grip. However, although Metal Elite Zombie couldn't grip the golden cudgel tightly, he could activate the yuan energy of metal in his body to control the golden cudgel. Manipulated by the yuan energy of metal in the golden armored corpse, the golden cudgel that was said to be indestructible, the tip of the cudgel suddenly erupted with a terrifying force of impact. Under the watchful eyes of Han Shua and Statholm, the golden cudgel smashed through the ice like crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. The golden cudgel weighed hundreds of millions of kilograms. Except for Metal Elite Zombie, whose body was brimming with yuan energy of metal, even Han Shua couldn't wield it with brute force. It seemed that Metal Elite Zombie wielding the golden cudgel truly lived up to his reputation as the #1 expert in the metal attribute and battle strength. Even the layer of ice reinforced by the Saintess with divine energy could be forcibly smashed through with the golden cudgel. "Let's go." Statholm the old monster was both surprised and delighted, and immediately shouted. Han Shua, who was staring at Metal Elite Zombie in disbelief, immediately reacted upon hearing Statholm the old monster's shout. After chanting an incantation, the complacent Metal Elite Zombie along with the golden cudgel were sent back to the netherworld by Han Shua. "Let's go," Han Shua replied. Like lightning, he and Statholm the old monster flew out of the broken hole. Outside, Tiana and the others from the Church of Light were still engaged in a fierce battle with the soul race. Among them, that Saintess possessed truly terrifying strength. Her body seemed to be shrouded in an endless stream of divine energy. Holding that holy grail that was bursting with holy light, she was actually able to keep the six-horned tribal king at bay. Not good. They've broken through the hole and escaped. The firm ice boundary at the cave entrance was laid out by the divine Magus Tiana. She had already sensed it the moment the firm ice boundary was broken. As soon as Han Shua and Statholm the old monster shot out from the inside, Tiana's cry of alarm rang out. However, at this time, whether it was the Saintess of the Church of Light or the three demigod existences, they were all fighting with the soul race clansmen. In a battle between experts of this level, unless one side had strength that far surpassed the other, they could not afford to be distracted in the slightest. Tiana's group of three dealt with the 4 5-pointed soul race clansmen. With the Divine Knight as the main attacker, Tiana and the Light Archmage constantly bombarded them with terrifying magic attacks. Although Tiana and the Light Archmage had deployed layers upon layers of defensive boundaries, they were clearly at a disadvantage against the four of them. Tiana let out a cry of alarm. Her cold attacks against the Soul Race clansmen slowed down a little. The pressure on the Light Archmage and the Divine Knight, who were already having a hard time dealing with them, multiplied. Among them, the Divine Knight was in a sorry state after being swept by 3 python tails, and was nearly seriously injured. Taking advantage of the fact that the few of them were occupied, Han Shua and Stadholm the old monster did not hesitate at all. They transformed into long streaks of light and rapidly flew into the distance. They did not dare to stay on this sacred mountain for even a moment longer. Han Shua and Stadholm the old monster ran extremely fast. Before anyone had the time to take a closer look at them, the two of them had already rushed out of this area. The Saintess of the Church of Light had placed all her energy on the six-horned soul race clansmen. She dared not be distracted in the slightest. She could only watch helplessly as the two of them left. She had no spare time to stop them. As soon as Stadholm rushed out of the sacred mountain, he immediately yelled at Han Shua, "Run!" Han Shua obviously understood how bad the situation was at this time. He moved like lightning and followed closely behind Stadholm. However, compared to Stadholm, Han Shua's face was a bit calmer. He was not as panicky as Stadholm. Once Han Shua left that cave in the sacred mountain, he had plenty of ways to escape. In terms of flying speed, Han Shua believed that even someone a level higher than him would not be able to catch up to him. In the worst-case scenario, Han Shua could still use the transportation matrix that led to the Cemetery of Death to escape. Therefore, with these things to rely on, Han Shua was not as anxious as Stadholm. Following behind Stadholm, the two escaped from the sacred mountain of the Church of Light. They did not enter Sandro City at the foot of the sacred mountain of the Church of Light. Instead, they took a detour and flew towards another city, Ordi City. After entering Ordi City, Stadholm the old monster used the token in his hand to activate the transportation matrix. After passing through several transportation matrices, the two flew from the border of Odin Empire back to Brute Merchant Alliance. Finally, they appeared in Tarik City of Brute Merchant Alliance. As soon as they arrived at Tarik City, Han Shua immediately sensed his location through a drop of blood essence in Elizabeth's brain. "Brian, it's all thanks to you that we could escape this time. I owe you a favor," Stadholm the old monster said to Han Shua as soon as they arrived at Tarik City. "You're welcome," Han Shua replied with a smile. After a short pause, Han Shua knitted his brows and asked, "The six-horned tribal king can sense our souls. What do you plan to do next?" Upon hearing this, Stadholm the old monster put on a worried look. Under Han Shua's gaze, he finally let out a sigh and said, "I will immediately find a secluded place to fuse the origin crystal with my soul. Only after fusing the origin crystal with my soul will I be able to thoroughly shake off the soul race's pursuit." However, we don't know the specific situation at the sacred mountain of the Church of Light. If that six-horned tribal king of the soul race didn't suffer serious injuries in the battle with the Saintess and finds you while you're fusing with the origin crystal, you will have no choice but to die, Han Shua said. "There's no other way. I can only take a gamble. If the six-horned tribal king were to find me midway, I can only blame it on my bad luck." The old monster sighed again, his face filled with helplessness. After hearing Stadholm's words, Han Shua didn't know what to say. This was truly a matter of helplessness. Han Shua had a pretty good impression of Stadholm the old monster. Although Han Shua might become enemies with him due to the existence of the 7 Grand Duchies, from their interactions over the past few days, Stadholm could be considered a straightforward and upright person. During the battle, he would constantly remind Han Shua of the dangers. Unlike Han Shua's conjecture, he did not harbor any evil intentions because he was the city lord of Bretel City. "In that case, I wish you good luck," Han Shua said to Stadholm the old monster after shaking his head and letting out a soft sigh. "You too. I hope we will have the opportunity to meet again." "It's a pleasure to meet you." Stadholm the old monster seemed to have let go of the worries in his heart as he said with a hearty smile. Then, as if he suddenly recalled something, he hesitated for a moment before continuing, "Brian, after we separate this time, we may never have the chance to meet again. There's something I want to discuss with you. I hope you can agree on the account that we fought side by side." "Tell me about it first." Han Shua furrowed his brows. He somewhat understood what Stadholm wanted to discuss. "For many years, I have been the state preceptor of the Verdun dynasty. Now that the Verdun dynasty no longer exists and has been divided into the 7 Grand Duchies, I still have some feelings for the 7 Grand Duchies. After we part ways today, perhaps both of us will be hunted down and killed by the six-horned tribal king. Perhaps one of us will be able to escape this calamity, or perhaps both of us will be lucky enough to survive. If I survive, I will restrain the 7 Grand Duchies from ever encroaching on Bretel City. But if I die, and you are lucky enough to survive, I hope you won't plunge the people of the 7 Grand Duchies into misery and suffering for my sake. Your Lancelot Empire and the Brute Merchant Alliance have always coveted the 7 Grand Duchies. I know that if I die, the 7 Grand Duchies will not be able to escape this calamity. If you are lucky enough to survive, the 7 Grand Duchies will certainly be swept to the ground by Bretel City. I don't beg you to stop, but I hope you can treat the citizens of the 7 Grand Duchies kindly. Stadholm the old monster looked deeply at Han Shuo and pleaded earnestly. It was because Stadholm had already prepared himself for death that he would say such a thing. No matter how one looked at it, Stadholm's request wasn't excessive. As soon as Stadholm's words fell, Han Shuo immediately nodded and said, "Rest assured, I will treat the citizens of the 7 Grand Duchies kindly." Han Shuo didn't know if Stadholm the old monster would die, but Han Shuo knew that he would definitely be able to escape this calamity. Han Shuo had long had the intention to encroach on the 7 Grand Duchies. Even if Stadholm the old monster was still alive, it wouldn't change his mind. Now, Stadholm merely wanted Han Shuo to promise him that he would treat the citizens of the 7 Grand Duchies kindly. This wasn't excessive at all. "Thank you. I will return to Stranglethorn Vale and make some arrangements. Afterwards, I will immediately find a place undetectable by ordinary people to fuse with the Fighting Aura Origin Crystal. I really hope that we will have the chance to meet again." Stadholm the old monster laughed heartily and immediately left in a carefree manner. As soon as Stadholm left, Han Shuo muttered in a low voice, "I hope you can escape this calamity." Han Shuo only felt a kind of sympathy and respect for this demigod existence that had obstructed the Lancelot Empire's conquest for so many years. He sincerely hoped that he would have the chance to meet the old monster again. The old monster gradually disappeared from Han Shuo's line of sight. Han Shuo took a deep breath and quickly left, relying on his senses to find Elizabeth. "Follow me." As soon as he saw Elizabeth, Han Shuo immediately instructed and brought Elizabeth back to Bretel City. Chapter 460. As soon as he arrived at Bretel City, Han Shuo introduced Elizabeth to Jack and the others. After giving them a few instructions, he immediately went to the secret chamber and activated the transportation matrix. As soon as he entered the Cemetery of Death, Han Shuo's body suddenly had a wonderful feeling. The dreadful pressure that had been following him like a shadow immediately disappeared without a trace. It disappeared. Han Shuo cried out in surprise. That dreadful pressure originated from the 6-horned tribal king of the soul race. Han Shuo could clearly feel it when he left Tarag Canyon. Then, as soon as Han Shuo entered the Cemetery of Death, he could no longer feel the pressure that had been weighing down on his heart. Walking out of the hall, looking at the pure white bones beneath his feet, then raising his head to look at the gloomy sky, Han Shuo suddenly understood what was going on. It seemed that the boundary that enveloped the entire Cemetery of Death had isolated the 6-horned tribal king's soul sensing ability. As long as he stayed within the Cemetery of Death, Han Shuo believed that the 6-horned tribal king wouldn't be able to locate him at all. Before coming to the Cemetery of Death, Han Shuo had made many plans. He was even prepared to use the skeletal staff to escape into the netherworld as soon as he entered the Cemetery of Death. But now, it seemed that these plans were unnecessary. The mysterious boundary of the Cemetery of Death had directly resolved Han Shuo's worries. Cemetery of Death. Oh, Cemetery of Death, just how many secrets are you hiding? Han Shuo couldn't help but sigh. To be able to block the 6-horned tribal king's soul sensing ability was sufficient proof of the miraculous effect of the boundary that enveloped the Cemetery of Death. Poor Stadholm. I wonder if he has left Stranglethorn Vale to cultivate in seclusion. But even if he is still in Stranglethorn Vale, the Cemetery of Death will not allow him to enter, Han Shuo thought to himself. With the threat of the 6-horned tribal king gone, Han Shuo felt much more relaxed. Then, He sat cross-legged in the mystical demon refinement area of the Cemetery of Death and took out the 3 spheres that he had plundered from his space ring. Of the 3 spheres, one was an origin crystal rich in the element of death, one was an origin crystal rich in the element of darkness, and the last one was emitting a destructive power that caused one's heart to palpitate. According to the old monster Stadholm, only a paranoid person would be willing to fuse with this sphere of destruction. While escaping from the Church of Light's sacred mountain, Han Shuo had already asked Stadholm the old monster about the detailed usage of the origin crystal. Now that everything was ready, Han Shuo held the 3 spheres in his hand and aimed at the origin crystal that was emitting pure death element. Grabbing the origin crystal that was emitting the element of death, Han Shuo slowly used his mental strength to enter the origin crystal. From the origin crystal, he sensed an incomparably enormous and clean energy of the element of death. Releasing his consciousness, Han Shuo tried to fuse the origin crystal into his consciousness according to the method Stadholm the old monster had taught him. Suddenly, something that Han Shuo did not expect happened. His mental strength could clearly sense the enormity and miraculousness of those strands of pure death element. But when Han Shuo tried to fuse his consciousness with this incomparably enormous energy of the element of death, according to the method Stadholm the old monster had taught him, his consciousness immediately locked up, not allowing even a tiny bit of the element of death to enter. His consciousness rejected the energy of the origin crystal, not allowing even a single strand of energy to fuse with his consciousness. He was unable to form the soul of element that Stadholm the old monster and Tiana had mentioned. Han Shuo's demonic infant had the miraculous ability to absorb many kinds of evil energies and transform them. But Han Shuo's consciousness was so selfish that it would not allow even a strand of energy that was incompatible with demonic arts to fuse with it. Han Shuo could clearly feel the rejection coming from his consciousness. That kind of exclusive energy made Han Shuo understand the tyranny of demonic arts. Looks like I'll have to try the ball of destruction. Putting away the origin crystal that was rich in the element of death, Han Shuo took out the sphere that was emitting an intense energy of destruction. Following the method Stadholm the old monster had taught him, he tried to fuse the energy within the ball of destruction into his consciousness. His consciousness still rejected it. That enormous energy of destruction was still unable to flow into his consciousness. Naturally, it was unable to fuse with his consciousness. Han Shuo had a bitter smile on his face. He held the origin crystal that was pure in the element of death in one hand, and the ball of destruction that was filled with the enormous energy of destruction in the other. He thought to himself that he had spent so much effort to snatch these 2 spheres. Who would have thought that he would be unable to absorb them? It seemed like all his efforts were in vain. Within Han Shuo's body, there were 3 most important things. One was the demonic infant located in his lower abdomen. The demonic infant was the source and foundation of demonic yuan, and was the foundation for the execution of demonic arts. The other 2 important things were located in the brain. The consciousness formed from the fusion of the 3 souls was the foundation of everything. Its importance was self-evident, and it was also what Han Shuo relied on to survive. The last one was also located in the brain. Similar to the golden core of martial practitioners and the demonic infant of demonic arts practitioners, it was also the source of energy. Of course, there were still some differences between this place and the demonic infant. This region of the brain stored mental strength, and was also the key point for a Grand Magus necromancer like Han Shuo to be able to cast necromancy magic. The most important of the 3 was of course the consciousness, which was what most people referred to as the soul. Within the consciousness were all of Han Shuo's experiences and memories, all of his comprehensions, knowledge of demonic arts, and understanding of necromancy magic. The consciousness was the foundation and evidence that Han Shuo was still alive. Han Shuo's demonic arts had reached such a level that the fusion of the 3 souls to form the consciousness was the foundation for the advancement of demonic arts. Han Shuo absolutely would not allow anything to go wrong with the consciousness. However, from the old monster Stadholm's words, Han Shuo knew that if one wanted to become a god in the field of magic, the soul must form the soul of element. Only then would the soul and elements reach the most perfect rapport, and only then would one have the deepest understanding of that type of magic. However, the soul of element was obviously a kind of evolution to the soul. This kind of evolution meant a change to the soul, and the soul was the most fundamental everything to a person. Unfortunately, his soul had already been transformed into the consciousness most suitable for practicing demonic arts. Unless Han Shuo degenerated his consciousness to its original state, the origin crystal of element would really be of no use. No matter how one looked at it, when comparing demonic arts and necromancy magic, it seemed that demonic arts were more useful to Han Shuo. Therefore, Han Shuo would never give up on his demonic arts. Besides, Han Shuo did not believe that he could not become a god without forming the soul of element. Therefore, after some consideration, Han Shuo gave up on the origin crystal of pure element of death. The three spheres contain the three energies of death, destruction, and darkness. None of them was something that Han Shuo could use. Placing the three spheres in front of him, Han Shuo began to consider how to make the best use of these things that he had painstakingly obtained. After thinking for a while, Han Shuo's mind lit up. He immediately summoned the little skull from the netherworld. This is for you. Take the energy inside and fuse it with your soul. This way, you will be able to make better use of the element of death in the netherworld. As soon as the little skull appeared, Han Shuo immediately handed the origin crystal of pure element of death to the little skull. He also told the little skull the method of soul fusion. Thank you, Father. I can feel that this thing can bring me unimaginable benefits. It is the treasure of the undead creatures. I don't know what it can change me into, but I will definitely become stronger. Definitely. The little skull held the origin crystal of pure element of death. His purple demon eye emitted a strong light that no one dared to look directly at. Han Shuo could feel his intense excitement and joy. That's good. I believe that you will become stronger, Han Shuo said with a smile as he felt the little skull's irrepressible excitement. Father, with this, I will subdue the bone dragon. In our world, I think I will become stronger and stronger. My sphere of influence will expand 100-fold. Little Skull said ambitiously. All right, go. Immediately fuse this origin crystal of pure element of death with your soul according to the method I told you, Han Shuo said with a smile. When the little skull nodded, he used a necromancy spell to send him back to the netherworld. Among Han Shuo's companions, only Emily could use the origin crystal of darkness to its greatest extent. The others did not cultivate dark magic. It seemed that Emily would be ecstatic this time. With the origin crystal of darkness fused with her soul, there was no doubt that Emily's strength would advance by leaps and bounds. As for the orb of destruction, Han Shuo racked his brains over and over again, but he still couldn't figure out how to use it. Looking at the orb of destruction in his hand, Han Shuo understood that there were some differences between this orb of destruction and the origin crystal. Once one's soul fused with this boundless energy of destruction, that person would certainly become a maniac who only knew destruction. Holding the origin crystal of destruction in his hand, Han Shuo stared at it for a long time. He didn't know what to do with it. Suddenly, a violent and boundless desire to slaughter surged from Han Shuo's body. With a thought, the demon's lair edge suddenly fell from the back of Han Shuo's neck into Han Shuo's palm. Boundless resentment and the desire to slaughter overflowed from the demon's lair edge, filling the entire cemetery of death. In Han Shuo's palm, the demon's lair edge's ferocious might overflowed to the heavens. A stream of blood glistened brightly, flowing on the demon's lair edge as if it had a life of its own. Han Shuo understood that the true primary soul within the demon's lair edge had evolved and formed. From today onwards, the demon's lair edge would become a peerless demonic weapon in the truest sense of the word. Just as Han Shuo was excitedly looking at the demon's lair edge suddenly flew out from his right palm. Before Han Shuo could react, the sharp point directly pierced into the ball of destruction that contained the enormous energy of destruction. While Han Shuo was greatly shocked, something happened that left him dumbstruck. The primary soul that had just formed within the demon's lair edge had begun to fuse with the terrifying energy of destruction within the ball. Chapter 461. Within a short period of time, the energy contained in the sphere containing the terrifying aura of destruction that Han Shuo had painstakingly obtained had been fused with the main soul within the demon's lair edge. After the main soul had fused with the energy of the sphere of destruction, it once again flew from Han Shuo's palm into Han Shuo's body and fell back into a dormant state. The demon's lair edge was a demonic weapon that Han Shuo cultivated with his life. Now that the main soul had formed, it had gained sentience. The main soul formed within the demon's lair edge, which was formed from Han Shuo's life essence and demonic yuan, would forever serve Han Shuo as its master. Unless Han Shuo's consciousness dissipated, the demon's lair edge would forever be a demonic weapon that belonged solely to Han Shuo. Han Shuo looked at the sphere in his hand that had lost the energy of destruction. He thought to himself that this was pretty good. At least he didn't benefit an outsider. After absorbing the energy of destruction within the sphere, the demon's lair edge would certainly become even more formidable. As a weapon solely for Han Shuo's use, the more powerful the demon's lair edge was, the more advantageous it would be for Han Shuo. It wasn't a bad thing to think about it this way. Of the three spheres, one was obtained by Little Skull, one was fused with the main soul that had just been formed within the demon's lair edge, and the last one belonged to the dark magus Emily. All three were people that Han Shuo could trust the most. Although Han Shuo's consciousness could not fuse with the three spheres, it could still indirectly strengthen him. Han Shuo, who had originally planned to fuse with the origin crystal of death, now seemed to have nothing to do with it. The only thing that worried Han Shuo was the threat of the six-horned tribal king of the soul race. If Han Shuo were to stay in the cemetery of death, the six-horned tribal king of the soul race would naturally be unable to do anything to Han Shuo under the protection of the boundary within the cemetery of death. He would not be able to sense Han Shuo's aura at all. However, it was impossible for Han Shuo to stay in the cemetery of death forever. Once he left the cemetery of death, the six-horned tribal king of the soul race would immediately sense the location of his soul. In that case, Han Shuo would have to face this terrifying threat that he could not resist for the time being. It seems that I still need to get rid of that guy's perception of my divine sense first, Han Shuo thought to himself, and began to look for a way to deal with it according to the memory left by Chu Kanglin. Han Shuo carefully recalled. He suddenly realized that even if he didn't deliberately search for a way, once his demonic arts reached the next 9 changes realm, his consciousness would definitely not be sensed by the six-horned tribal king. Once Han Shuo attained the 9 changes realm, not only would he be able to change his physical appearance at will, but he would also be able to change his temperament at will. He would also be able to change his consciousness into a myriad of forms. At that time, the six-horned tribal king would no longer be able to sense Han Shuo. Of course, once Han Shuo attained the 9 changes realm, even if the six-horned tribal king came knocking on his door, he would still be dead meat. In the current carnal realm, although one's consciousness could not be changed at will, one could use a kind of concealment technique to conceal one's consciousness. As long as Han Shuo did not deliberately utilize the miraculous power of his consciousness would remain in a state of nothingness under the effect of the concealment technique. No one would be able to sense the location of his consciousness. In truth, the concealment technique was one of the miraculous functions of the consciousness. It was just that in the past, Han Shuo did not spend the time and effort to study the profoundness of the consciousness. As soon as he learned that the consciousness could remain in a state of nothingness when it was not using its miraculous powers to spy on everything in its surroundings, Han Shuo immediately began to practice this concealment technique according to his control over the consciousness. Han Shuo felt that it did not take him too long to master this concealment technique. As long as Han Shuo's consciousness remained in a state of nothingness and did not spy on external objects or release any special demonic arts, his consciousness would always remain in that miraculous state. This state would not affect Han Shuo's thinking and memory. It would even help Han Shuo make rational decisions about a matter, and would not cause Han Shuo to lose control of his emotions and do something that went against his character. After Han Shuo believed that he had mastered this concealment technique, he naturally wanted to try it out. After returning to the transportation matrix at the center of the Cemetery of Death, Han Shuo activated the transportation matrix and returned to the secret chamber of the City Lord's mansion in Bretel City. As expected, even after leaving the Cemetery of Death, Han Shuo could no longer feel the pressure coming from the six-horned tribal king. This indicated that the concealment technique was indeed effective. Han Shuo no longer needed to worry about the potential threat of the six-horned tribal king. Han Shuo immediately called for a meeting and gathered Dorcas, Jack, and the others. When everyone was present, Han Shuo looked at Dorcas and said, "From today onwards, you will be in charge of invading the 7 Grand Duchies. You should start making preparations. I will make a trip to the Empire's Asen City. I will give you detailed instructions when I return. I have waited for this day for a very long time." Dorcas's eyes shone with the radiance of exuberant ambition. Han Shuo could clearly see the excitement in this war maniac's heart. "Master, what are you preparing to do?" Dark Dragon Gilbert looked at Han Shuo and asked in puzzlement. "You stay by Dorcas's side. His strength is weak, so you must be in charge of him. Don't let anyone assassinate him." Han Shuo didn't answer and only instructed Dark Dragon Gilbert. "All right, how did I become a bodyguard? I used to protect that brat Trunks, but now it's an even weaker one." Dark Dragon mumbled unwillingly. "Elizabeth, you stay in Bretel City. Be on guard against people playing tricks in the dark. There are a few fellows in Bretel City who aren't strong enough. You must watch over them carefully." After instructing Dark Dragon Gilbert, Han Shuo then instructed Elizabeth. "Understood, Master," Elizabeth replied. Afterwards, Dorcas and Jack explained the current situation of Bretel City to Han Shuo. From the two of them, Han Shuo learned that the population of Bretel City had increased by more than 10 times, reaching a population of 530,000. Under the development of Dorcas, the Bretel City army had 50,000 elite soldiers roaming about everywhere, and 30,000 city guards defending the city. Bretel City, with its rapidly developing commerce, had its own weapon workshops and armor craftsmen. The 5 mines around it never lacked all kinds of ores. A total of 80,000 Bretel City soldiers were fully equipped. The weapons and armor in their hands were not inferior to the Imperial Guards of Asen City. With the strong support of the current king, Lawrence, and the convenience of the magical transportation array, in addition to Bretel City's unique terrain, Bretel City had become an impregnable city with flourishing commerce in just a few short years. At this time, Bretel City's army was strong, and there was no need to worry about the rear. It was the best opportunity to attack the 7 Grand Duchies. "Very good. I'll make a trip to Asen City first. When I return, I'll set off with you all." Han Shuo was in a good mood as he laughed heartily. The meeting thus ended. Han Shuo also headed towards the transportation array in Bretel City. Currently, the ones who posed the greatest threat to Han Shuo were the 6-horned tribal king of the Soul Race and the Church of Light. The 6-horned tribal king was unable to sense Han Shuo's position, so this threat could basically be ignored. If 2 demigod existences of the Church of Light joined forces, Han Shuo wouldn't be able to contend against them, but he was confident that he could easily escape. As for the Saintess with the domain of divinity, Han Shuo learned from Statholm that she seemed to be bound by the sacred mountain of the Church of Light and rarely left the sacred mountain. A Saintess who basically wouldn't leave the sacred mountain of the Church of Light wasn't much of a threat to Han Shuo. In that case, Han Shuo really had nothing to worry about. The desires of the carnal realm gave Han Shuo the urge to go all out. Only when one's desires were completely satisfied in the carnal realm could Han Shuo break through to the next 9 changes realm. Therefore, Han Shuo didn't restrain the desires in his heart at all and was ready to go all out. In the history of demonic sects, any ancestor who had broken through to the 9 changes realm would completely release the desires in their hearts in the carnal realm. These people were often ambitious and ruthless characters in the world. In many dynasties, these ancestors of demonic sects had played an important role, becoming the ones who controlled the tides of time. Now that Bretel City had its own transportation matrix, it was extremely convenient to travel to and from Asen City. Han Shuo used this transportation matrix and appeared in Asen City in the blink of an eye. After arriving in Asen City, Han Shuo headed straight for the Dark Mantle headquarters. Before coming to Asen City, Han Shuo had learned from Dick that Emily rarely carried out missions herself. She was now in charge of assigning missions to the Dark Mantle headquarters. Her current position was much more relaxed and less dangerous. It seemed that perhaps it was because Han Shuo had basked in Emily's light that she was able to be so carefree. Mount Ordas, Dark Mantle headquarters. After 3 years, Han Shuo had already become a legendary figure in the Dark Mantle. From the moment Han Shuo entered the Dark Mantle headquarters, when some of the seniors on the road discovered Han Shuo's arrival, they all looked at Han Shuo with incomparable admiration. "Where is Lady Emily?" Han Shuo asked as he watched the guide beside him lead him straight to Candide's secret chamber. Only after hearing Han Shuo's question did the guide remember the relationship between Han Shuo and Emily. He immediately revealed a knowing smile and said to Han Shuo, "Lady Emily and Lord Candide are not far from each other. Lord Brian, which one do you intend to go to first?" "Bring me to Lady Emily's secret chamber first," Han Shuo instructed. "All right," the guide respectfully replied. His gaze towards Han Shuo was filled with admiration from the bottom of his heart. In their hearts, although the current Han Shuo wasn't one of the 3 heavyweights of the Dark Mantle, he was someone even more respected than the 3 heavyweights. Chapter 462. In the stone room, there were a few wide bookshelves and a large black wooden table in the middle. Emily had a focused expression as she held an ancient handbook in her hand. Her dark brows were slightly furrowed, as if she was puzzled by the dark magic knowledge written in the handbook. Reporting to Lady Emily, Lord Brian requests to come in. A report came from a narrow tube on Emily's table. Pleasant surprise immediately replaced the focused expression on Emily's face. She couldn't help but let out a soft cry and hastily put down the ancient handbook in her hand. She took out a bright round mirror from her space ring and hurriedly drew a detailed picture of her delicate face in the mirror. "Lady Emily, can you let Lord Brian come in?" The guide heard a soft cry and understood that Emily was in the secret room. However, after calling out, Emily didn't respond. The guide couldn't help but ask again. Emily, who was busy tidying up her appearance, hurriedly said when she heard the confirmation from the narrow tube, "Wait a moment, it'll be done in a moment." As she spoke, Emily carefully looked at herself in the mirror again. After confirming that her face was flawless, she extravagantly smoothed out the wrinkles on her black magic robe with magic. Only then did she open her mouth and say, "All right, let Lord Brian come in." With a flash of light, Han Shuo used the short-distance transportation formation to directly reach the stone room where Emily was. "Brian." When she saw the imposing figure that had haunted her dreams appear in the stone room, Emily immediately cried out in joy. She immediately threw herself into Han Shuo's broad chest like a swallow returning to its nest. She used all her strength to hug Han Shuo tightly, as if Han Shuo beside her would disappear at any time. A gentle smile hung on Han Shuo's face as he lowered his head to look at Emily in his arms. After 3 years, the beauty in his arms didn't change at all. Instead, she seemed to be even more charming and charming. Her delicate face was so delicate that it seemed as if it would break with the slightest breeze. Her face was flushed with happiness and excitement, and it was brimming with beauty that couldn't be replicated. Han Shuo could feel Emily's gradually rising body temperature. Han Shuo, who hadn't tasted anything for 3 years, felt the alluring and curvaceous body of the wonderful woman in his arms. An uncontrollable flame surged from his lower abdomen. Emily obviously felt the high spirits and heat emitting from Han Shuo's lower abdomen. Originally, she was already exceptionally sensitive after being nourished by Han Shuo. Suddenly, her bright eyes became dazed. Her voice and delicate body suddenly trembled together. Her 2 hands that were tightly hugging Han Shuo unconsciously began to move wantonly on Han Shuo's broad back. With a low roar, Han Shuo carried Emily in one go. His body swayed as he carried her to the office table that was used for assigning missions to the Dark Mantle members. Their clothes were torn to shreds amidst the sound of tearing. After a long while, Emily couldn't even move a finger. Her body was indolently curled up on the soft and wide chair. The strand of demonic yuan that flowed within Emily's body slowly circulated, slowly nourishing Emily's body. Her lost physical strength was slowly recovering. After a long while, Emily exhaled lightly in extreme comfort. She opened her eyes that contained an expression like the ocean and focused on Han Shua's body. She asked, "Brian, when did you arrive at Asen City?" "I just arrived." Han Shua changed his clothes again. He gently picked up a soft blanket and covered Emily's alluring body. Her bright eyes suddenly lit up with excitement. The corners of Emily's mouth hooked into a happy and sweet smile. She lowered her eyebrows shyly and softly said, "Then, you came to my place as soon as you arrived at Asen City?" "Yes," Han Shua replied with a smile. "That's great." Emily suddenly raised her head. She looked at Han Shua with the sweetness of a little girl and softly exclaimed. Her two hands tightly grasped Han Shua's big hand that was gently caressing her cheeks. She took the initiative to bring the back of Han Shua's hand to lightly caress her cheeks. "This is an origin crystal of the dark element that I obtained from Tarag Canyon. Take it and slowly fuse your soul with the origin crystal of the dark element. It will allow you to form a soul of element. It will be of great benefit to your training in dark magic," Han Shua said with a gentle smile as he took out the origin crystal of the dark element and placed it in Emily's palm. As soon as the origin crystal of the dark element was taken out by Han Shua from his space ring, Emily, who had been lazily curled up in her chair, immediately sensed the enormous amount of extremely pure dark element contained within. This kind of dark element contained no impurities at all. Its pure energy carried an indescribable allure. Even if Emily didn't use her mental strength to deliberately sense it, as a dark magus, she could deeply feel how magical and mysterious the thing contained within was. Such pure dark element. What is this thing? Emily's voice suddenly rose as she looked at Han Shua with bright eyes. This is called an origin crystal. It contains enormous amounts of the purest dark element without any impurities. Once your soul fuses with the origin crystal, your soul will become a soul of element. This will allow you to have the deepest understanding of dark magic, and your soul and dark element will achieve a perfect affinity. If a magus of the elemental element wishes to become a god, they must form a soul of element and a body of element. Ordinary elemental magi may never find the knack of forming a soul of element. Even if they knew the method, it is not easy for an average person to achieve the transformation of their soul into a soul of element. As long as you fuse your soul with this elemental crystal, you'll be able to form an elemental soul by using the enormous amount of pure dark elemental energy within. This way, you'll definitely make rapid progress in your dark magic cultivation. Moreover, this will give you the foundation to become a god in dark magic. Han Shua looked at Emily with a smile as he explained in a gentle voice. Emily's delicate body couldn't help but tremble. Her bright eyes shone with a light of disbelief. She looked at Han Shua, and her voice also trembled. Her speech was not very smooth. "Boo. Brian, is this for me? Are you sure this is for me?" "Silly woman, of course it's for you." Han Shua caressed Emily's cheeks and said softly. Suddenly, Han Shua thought of something and said solemnly, "However, with your current realm, you must absorb it carefully. I don't know if your soul can completely withstand this enormous amount of dark element. In any case, be careful." I will." Emily held the origin crystal of darkness with both hands. She was so happy and excited that she almost fainted. From Han Shua's words, she understood what this origin crystal meant to her. This was a treasure that could make her become a god. Emily could no longer use words to express her love and gratitude towards Han Shua. "Lady Emily, is Brian here with you?" Candide's voice suddenly came from the magical device on the table. Candide's voice was a bit unsteady. He seemed to be inexplicably agitated. Before Han Shua could reply, Candide's voice sounded from within the magical device. "I can sense an incomparably pure and enormous dark elemental energy over there. Are you guys all right?" Han Shua and Emily looked at each other and reacted at the same time. Candide was also a dark Grand Magus. He had immersed himself in dark magic for even longer than Emily, so his understanding of dark magic was probably also higher than Emily's. This was an origin crystal that contained an enormous amount of pure dark element. Han Shuo didn't use any special methods to conceal the aura emitted from it. As a dark Grand Magus, it was only natural that Candide could sense this enormous amount of pure dark element. Quickly put it away. Han Shuo covered the magical device with one hand and hastily instructed Emily. When Candide's voice sounded, Emily had also reacted. She first hurriedly put on her clothes, then put away the origin crystal after Han Shuo's reminder. She immediately said in a panic, "He knows. What do we do? What should we do?" Emily shouldn't have been so flustered to be able to sit in her current position. The reason why she was somewhat out of her wits was purely because the impact of the origin crystal was a bit too great. Emily was so excited and agitated that it was hard for her to calm down. This was why she was so flustered. It doesn't matter. Don't say that he doesn't know anything. Even if he knows that I gave you the origin crystal, what can he do? Han Shuo comforted Emily. He knew that Emily was too excited right now, and that it wasn't suitable for Candide to come in. He immediately added, "You stay here and calm down. Let me handle Candide." As soon as he finished speaking, Han Shuo stood on top of the transportation matrix in Emily's room. With a flash of light, he appeared in front of Candide. "Brian, I just heard someone report that you've returned." "Oh, right. I just sensed an extremely pure dark element coming from Emily's stone room. I've never sensed such pure dark element in any place in so many years." "What's going on?" Candide asked. "It's nothing. I just used my martial technique to help Emily condense the dark element so that she can more directly and clearly feel the existence of the dark element." Han Shuo smiled faintly and immediately changed the topic. "My lord, I've met the old monster, Statholm." Perhaps the old monster, Statholm, had piqued Candide's interest, or perhaps Candide was astute and understood that Han Shuo didn't want to talk about it in depth. In any case, he didn't continue on the topic of the dark element. Instead, he asked about the meeting between Han Shuo and the old monster, Statholm, in astonishment. Chapter 463. After concealing the matter of the origin crystal, Han Shuo narrated his and Tiana's encounter in Tarag Canyon. He didn't even conceal the matter of the sacred mountain of the Church of Light in Odin Empire. As Candide listened to Han Shuo's recount of the events, his face was gloomy and his brows were deeply furrowed. "Lord Candide, do you know anything about the true experts of Profound Continent and those Soul Race clansmen?" The reason why Han Shuo revealed everything was because he wanted to ask Candide if he knew of their existence. Tiana is the protector of Kasi Empire. In Kasi Empire, Tiana is a godlike existence. She and our Lancelot Empire's Dark Divine Magus, Ermite Cotton, are characters from the same era. "I really did not expect that she is still alive," Candide exclaimed. A character from the same era as Ermite Cotton. Han Shuo was gobsmacked. Ermite Cotton was the most famous character in the history of Lancelot Empire. It was because of Ermite Cotton's existence that Lancelot Empire could be established and possessed the great power and influence it had today. However, Ermite Cotton, the Dark Divine Magus, was a character from 500 years ago. Now that he heard Candide's words, Han Shuo finally understood how long Tiana had lived. No wonder even the old monster Statholm, an antique who had lived through 2 dynasties, had to address her as elder sister Tiana. Apart from Tiana, about the Church of Light and those Soul Race clansmen, does your lordship know of their origins? Han Shuo looked at Candide in a daze and asked. "I have learned some information from ancient records about the Divine Knight and Light Divine Magus of the Church of Light. Both of them were famous tyrannical existences of the Church of Light 100 years ago. Everyone thought that they had died of old age. Who would have thought that they were still alive to this day? As for the Saintess of the Church of Light and the Soul Race of Tarag Canyon, I've never heard of them. If you hadn't told me this information, I'm afraid that I would never have known that such characters existed on Profound Continent." Sigh. These people are simply beyond my imagination. Candide couldn't help but shake his head and sigh as he explained to Han Shu. Candide's knowledge was limited, but the fact that Tiana was the protector of Kasi Empire still allowed Han Shuo to understand her origins. Brian, you're saying that you already possess the same strength as Statholm, Tiana, and the others? After a while, Candide looked at Han Shuo in a daze and suddenly asked. Just now, Han Shuo said that he had fought alongside the old demon Statholm and did not conceal the matter of the soul race. Candide naturally understood a fact. Han Shuo and Statholm were characters of the same level. There was nothing to conceal about this. Han Shuo nodded and calmly admitted, I believe that I possess that so-called demigod strength. Unimaginable, too unimaginable. Candide was somewhat incoherent as he muttered, Madame Grace's astrology is indeed miraculous. No wonder it's said that you can bring a new future to Lancelot Empire. With an existence like you staying in Lancelot Empire, any nation will become stronger. I don't know if it's stronger or not, but Statholm won't appear in the 7 Grand Duchies for the time being. The Brute Merchant Alliance has just lost the sacred Magus of Lightning, Reynold, and the Tanai magical beast of Tarag Canyon is roaming about everywhere disturbing the people. There's also a group of soul race clansmen of unknown origin. I reckon that he won't have the time to deal with other matters for the time being. This is the best time for us to dispatch troops to the 7 Grand Duchies. Whether or not Lancelot Empire can swallow up the 7 Grand Duchies will depend on this. Han Shuo said to Candide, brimming with ambition, Brian, go see His Majesty. I believe that His Majesty will definitely support you with all his might. After hearing Han Shuo's description, Candide immediately urged Han Shuo. It seemed that he was also somewhat impatient. Nodding his head, Han Shuo confirmed the identity of the 4th Dark Sun envoy from Candide. Without notifying Emily, he directly went to the Imperial Palace through the transportation matrix used by the highest-ranking members of the Dark Mantle headquarters. Brian, you brat, you've disappeared for 3 years. You've finally reappeared. Hearing that Han Shuo was seeking an audience, Lawrence, who was already the king of Lancelot Empire, personally came to greet Han Shuo. He immediately laughed heartily when he saw Han Shuo. Compared to 3 years ago, Lawrence had more of the majesty of a king who held the life and death of others. He had also become more mature and experienced. His originally clean lips were purposefully trimmed with a beard, and his eyes constantly sparkled with the radiance of wisdom. Your Majesty, long time no see. Han Shuo came forward with a faint smile. He waited until he reached Lawrence's side before saying, Your Majesty, let's talk in private. Everyone, withdraw. Lawrence waved his hand for all the guards to withdraw. He then pulled Han Shuo back into the Great Hall, chuckling as he said, When there are no outsiders, we are still good friends. Hee, why did you suddenly think of coming to see me this time? I've come this time to give you a great gift, Han Shuo said with a smile. Oh, what kind of gift? Lawrence asked with interest. The 7 Grand Duchies, Han Shuo lightly shouted. Lawrence's body trembled, his eyes bursting with a cold light that normal people wouldn't dare look directly at. He said to Han Shuo with some excitement, Brian, are you confident? Nodding his head, Han Shuo recounted the conversation he'd had with Candide earlier to Lawrence. When Han Shuo finished, Lawrence's entire body trembled, and he tightly grasped Han Shuo's hands. He looked at Han Shuo with fiery eyes and asked incredulously, Boo, Brian, you're saying that you already possess the strength of a demigod? That's right. Han Shuo said affirmatively. Good, good, good. Lawrence threw his head back and laughed maniacally. After saying good 3 times, he laughed heartily and said, After our ancestor Ermite Cotton, our Lancelot Empire finally has another demigod expert. Haha, from today onwards, who would dare to ignore the existence of our Lancelot Empire's experts? Don't be too happy too early. I've just said that demigod existences aren't the strongest experts on the continent. Besides, I'm not the only demigod existence. Kasi Empire's Tiana is one as well. As the headquarters of the Church of Light, Odin Empire has more than one demigod existence. Han Shua hastily poured cold water on Lawrence when he saw that he was so excited that he was about to go crazy. He was afraid that Lawrence would become too reliant on him. I know. Lawrence's voice was high as he excitedly said, "Of course I know. But with you in Lancelot Empire, I'm more confident. I've long had the intention of conquering the Brute Merchant Alliance and Kasi Empire, but I've always put it on hold due to various misgivings. But now, our Lancelot Empire can really go all out. All right, I think you're not someone without a sense of propriety. Let's start with the 7 Grand Duchies. Among the 7 Grand Duchies, the Helen Duchy and the Ballet Duchy have already secretly contacted me. As long as we act discreetly this time, without the old monster Statholm coming out to stir things up, taking down the 7 Grand Duchies in one fell swoop is in the bag," Han Shua said in a deep voice. "All right, I'll give you my full support, whether it's military force or material resources. Tell me, what do you need? I'll use the strength of the entire empire to help you." Lawrence was extremely straightforward. It seemed that he was determined to keep Han Shua firmly under control. "To be honest, mobilizing troops for war isn't my strong suit," Han Shua replied with a wry smile. He thought for a moment before continuing. "As for how to attack the 7 Grand Duchies, I'll leave it to you all to discuss." But it'd be best if the commander-in-chief for this matter is Dorcas. That fellow has been roaming around the 7 Grand Duchies for the past few years and is extremely familiar with the circumstances of the 7 Grand Duchies. In addition, he's extremely adept at commanding troops. I believe it's most appropriate for him to be the commander-in-chief. No problem. I'll make arrangements for this matter. Don't worry, without Statholm's obstruction this time, the 7 Grand Duchies will definitely find it hard to resist the iron hooves of our Lancelot Empire. Lawrence said to Han Shua, brimming with confidence. "All right, I've said all that needs to be said. I think you also need some time to prepare, so I'll be leaving first." This time I haven't had the time to see my women. If I don't find them immediately, I reckon they'll complain about me again," Han Shua said to Lawrence with a smile. Knowingly winking at Han Shua, Lawrence said with an understanding smile, "I understand. Hee. Go repay your debt of gentleness. Oh, that's right. Your mansion has been renovated and all the servants are still there. Phoebe, Fanny, and the others will also stay there for a few days from time to time. Don't forget that you still have a home in Asen City." Last time, during the chaos in Asen City, the mansions of many great nobles had been turned into ashes in a single night. Han Shua's Count Mansion had also suffered heavy damage. Originally, Han Shua had thought that the mansion was completely destroyed. However, it seemed that Lawrence really valued Han Shua and had actually helped him renovate it. "Thank you, Your Majesty," Han Shua replied. He didn't say anything else and left the palace. A demigod expert. Madame Grace is truly an admirable astrologer. Brian, you really are my lucky star," Lawrence muttered ruefully after Han Shua left. Chapter 464. For the next few days, Han Shua stayed in his mansion in Asen City. Fanny and Phoebe came over upon hearing the news and enjoyed the rare time they spent together with Han Shua. During this time, Emily would also come to Han Shua's mansion every time she finished dealing with the Dark Mantle's matters. She never mentioned the matter of Han Shua giving her the origin crystal of darkness. Han Shua was truly incomparably comfortable these few days. Every single one of the 3 women was a lovely wife that any ordinary man could only dream of. After not seeing each other for 3 years and finally getting together with great difficulty, they all deliberately accompanied Han Shua in his happiness. Among them, Phoebe and Emily, who had long had intimate relations with Han Shua, were even more lingering and entangled with Han Shua. In the carnal realm, Han Shua's various desires were uncontrollable. His control over his lust had also greatly decreased. For the past few days, he had been fooling around with Phoebe and Emily all day long. In the beginning, Phoebe and Emily were alone with Han Shua. Later on, when Han Shua found it difficult to control his lust, he no longer cared about whether the two were shy or not. After sleeping together for a while, the two women gradually let go of the knot in their hearts and began to work together to serve Han Shuo. The pleasure of a man and two women had a different flavor. Phoebe and Emily, who were originally a little estranged from each other, actually became more and more tacit as they worked together. Their relationship also became more and more intimate. In the carnal realm, Han Shuo was never tired of doing such absurd things. When he discovered that it was beneficial to the relationship between the two women, he frequently ravaged the two women. During this process, Han Shuo discovered that his state of mind in the carnal realm had unknowingly calmed and stabilized. Every time his lust was released, his demonic yuan would become richer and more profound. The only thing that made Han Shuo a little regretful was Fanny. Perhaps it was because she was shy, or perhaps it was because of Firenze's restraint. Every time Han Shuo tried to break through the last line of defense to possess Fanny, Fanny would always blush and say that Firenze would not allow her to lose her chastity before marriage. That old fart. He's a little too nosy. Han Shuo had lost count of how many times he had cursed Firenze in his heart. If Han Shuo was proficient in the dark magic of curses, Firenze would have long been cursed to death by Han Shuo. Brian, you are not allowed to say such things about my father. You already have Emily and Phoebe. The two of them are not enough for you. For you two. Panting, Fanny pushed Han Shuo away. Her clothes were half undone, and her breasts were slightly exposed. Her bright eyes were misty with lust as she blushed shyly. Fanny was, after all, a little too shy and could not bring herself to finish her last sentence. Han Shuo's lower body was high and ready to strike. His face was flushed, and he was panting heavily like a beast in heat. He gnashed his teeth and cursed Firenze for being a bastard. Seeing that Fanny had pushed him away at the most crucial moment, Han Shuo had no choice but to pull up his pants. He pondered whether he should immediately leave this place and find Emily and Phoebe to relieve his lust. At this moment, Han Shuo's demonic yuan reacted in an extremely chaotic manner. Han Shuo immediately turned pale with fright. This kind of situation had not happened for a long time. This sudden occurrence caused Han Shuo to be somewhat at a loss. The more Han Shuo forcefully suppressed the naked desire in his heart for Fanny, the more chaotic the demonic yuan became. Even the demonic infant felt a sense of insecurity. Oh no! Han Shuo cursed inwardly. He had already understood what was going on. In the carnal realm, only when one's heart's desires were completely released would one be able to advance in both realm and demonic yuan. On the contrary, once Han Shuo restrained his desires that went against his heart, his realm would regress instead of advancing. For the past few days, Han Shuo had restrained himself several times on Fanny's body. He had already vaguely felt that something was wrong. Now that the demonic yuan in his body was in chaos, Han Shuo naturally reacted immediately. Han Shuo himself was well aware of how strong his desire to possess Fanny was. The more Fanny rejected him, the more violent that strong desire became. Especially when Fanny herself was somewhat unable to restrain herself and was almost succeeded by Han Shuo time and time again. The desire in Han Shuo's heart increased exponentially. After this happened a few times, Han Shuo finally suffered the consequences of his own actions. He felt that he was gradually losing control of the demonic yuan in his body. The more Han Shuo wanted to let go and leave this place, the worse his body's condition became. For a character of Han Shuo's level, it was truly difficult for an average person to harm him. Apart from a few elusive true gods, only Han Shuo himself could destroy himself. Feeling the tumultuous changes in his body, Han Shuo struggled fiercely in his heart. Perhaps he would suffer from qi deviation and suffer heavy injuries, or perhaps he would possess Fanny to calm the chaos in his heart. Han Shuo endured the increasingly unfavorable changes in his body. His face was flushed red to the ears, and he clenched his teeth in hesitation. Brian, what's wrong? Fanny had obviously also discovered that Han Shuo's condition was far from good. Disregarding her half-exposed breasts, she hastily rushed to Han Shuo's side and reached out to caress Han Shuo's forehead, which was drenched in cold sweat. She was so flustered that she didn't know what to do. Damn it, Fanny is my woman. It doesn't matter if I want her sooner or later. How can Forenza interfere in my affairs? After pondering for a moment, Han Shuo no longer dilly-dallied. He suddenly embraced Fanny. While Fanny's heart was in a mess and she didn't know what to do, Han Shuo panted as he moved his lips close to Fanny's little ears and quickly explained the current situation to Fanny. When Han Shuo finished explaining, Fanny's breathing quickened. She was similarly panting as she asked, "Brian, is what you said true? You're not joking. You have to do it with us so that you won't be in so much pain?" "I'm really not joking. This is the peculiarity of my martial technique," Han Shuo explained to Fanny with a bitter smile while panting heavily. Amorous feelings gradually filled her bright eyes. Fanny no longer resisted and took the initiative to undress in front of Han Shuo. Her perfectly proportioned body was slowly exposed in front of Han Shuo. Her curvaceous body was like a beautiful jade that exuded an enchanting radiance. Han Shuo looked at Fanny in front of him, intoxicated. "Brian, what are you waiting for?" The corner of Fanny's mouth hooked into a faint smile. In Han Shuo's eyes, it was so charming, so delicate, so irresistible. Without any hesitation, Han Shuo pulled with his large hands. Fanny's alluring, naked body that resembled that of a goddess completely fell into Han Shuo's broad chest. At this moment, the demonic yuan within Han Shuo's body no longer ran amok, and the demonic infant suddenly quieted down. "Brian, be gentle. I'm afraid of pain." Fanny's bashful appearance was incomparably beautiful. She suddenly hugged Han Shuo's back tightly and cried out a little nervously. "Don't worry, you won't feel a bit of pain," Han Shuo promised gently. Soon after, he abruptly lifted Fanny up and scuttled onto the wide, soft bed like a cheetah. An enchanting moan mixed with Han Shuo's beast-like panting immediately reverberated in the room, like an incomparably moving song of nature. "Little wench, you've been dealt with just the same." In another room, Phoebe, who was practicing with her sword, suddenly stopped and listened attentively for a while before murmuring, "Hee hee, I knew she wouldn't be able to escape from that little pervert's evil hands." Emily had just returned from a day's work in the Dark Mantle. She walked into Phoebe's practice room and spoke to her with a charming smile. "That's true. I'm just disdainful of her persistence. She's so pure. It's like she's setting off how slutty the two of us are." Phoebe finally voiced out the reason for her dissatisfaction. It looked like this was what she was dissatisfied with. "Hee hee, little sister Phoebe, don't talk nonsense. You're the only one who's slutty. Don't drag me into this with you, all right?" Emily laughed so hard that she was rocking back and forth. She winked and purposefully teased Phoebe. You're still talking." Phoebe's face was so embarrassed that it looked like it had been smeared with red dye. She angrily rushed at Emily and put down the long sword in her hand to tickle Emily. She retorted, "You're not slutty? Then who was the one who used your mouth yesterday and enjoyed it so much?" "Damned sister, I'll tear your mouth apart." Emily, who had been laughing delicately, was so embarrassed that she almost wanted to find a hole to hide in after hearing Phoebe's words. The two of them immediately blushed and playfully fought with each other. However, they were mostly joking and naturally didn't use any real strength. Oh! Fanny's slightly shrill moan suddenly fell into the two's ears. The movements of the two women who were still fooling around suddenly froze. This loud moan signified Fanny's defeat. The two women were very clear in their hearts. Soon after, the two of them seemed to think of something at the same time and immediately blushed. They could clearly feel each other's body temperature rising. Emily licked the corner of her rosy mouth and suddenly suggested, "I'm sure that Brian definitely hasn't finished. Why don't we go find him and pull Fanny in as well?" "Hey, you still say that you're not slutty, but that you're always coming up with some dirty ideas." Phoebe cursed in a low voice and then said in an even smaller voice, "That's right. I really want to see what that girl Fanny looks like now." "All right, let's go find him," Emily suggested boldly and immediately pulled Phoebe into Han Shuo's room. "Hee hee, just in time to accompany me." When Han Shuo saw the two women come in, he immediately laughed heartily. The room was immediately filled with boundless spring scenery. That kind of erotic moan that made one's heart itch once again reverberated. Chapter 465. Time passed quickly. Han Shua enjoyed the blessings of having multiple wives, and his inner desires were fully released. His demonic arts no longer showed any signs of chi deviation, but instead became increasingly profound. Apart from King Lawrence and a few members of the Dark Mantle, no one else knew that Han Shua had returned to Asen City. Therefore, in the past few days, Han Shua had been enjoying himself with the 3 women in his own mansion. There were no nobles who deliberately tried to curry favor with him. Happy times were ultimately short-lived. When Emily came over again and told Han Shua that Lawrence was ready to attack the 7 Grand Duchies, Han Shua had no choice but to leave Asen City once again. Fortunately, the spatial magic matrix connecting Asen City and Bredel City had already been completed. The 3 women were all noble characters and could easily use the transportation matrix to travel back and forth. Therefore, Han Shua's departure didn't cause the 3 women to feel intense sadness. After communicating with Lawrence Candide, Han Shua left Asen City and returned to Bredel City. As soon as he arrived at Bretel City, Han Shua learned from Dorcas and the others that Bretel City's preparations were complete. They only needed to wait for the Empire's reinforcements to arrive before they could directly attack the 7 Grand Duchies. Leading troops into battle wasn't Han Shua's strong suit. He had given all the military authority to Dorcas. After so many years, Dorcas had fully proven his ability to lead troops on the stage of Bretel City. All the soldiers of Bretel City willingly submitted to his leadership. Senior brother. After returning to the city lord's mansion, Balins respectfully saluted in front of the door. Why are you here? Han Shua was a little surprised to see Balins. After exclaiming softly, he couldn't help but carefully size up Balins. After 3 years, Balins's murderous aura and bloody stench had completely disappeared. Han Shua understood that this wasn't a sign that Balins didn't have any achievements on the god-slaying devil path. On the contrary, from the aura Han Shua sensed from Balins's body, he understood that the former had successfully cultivated the god-slaying devil path to a realm where his murderous aura was restrained. At this realm, Balins was proficient in using murderous aura. When he wasn't fighting an enemy, his murderous aura wouldn't leak out at all. Compared to his previous state of dense murderous aura, this kind of restrained murderous aura showed that his progress was extremely fast. Senior brother, for the past 3 years, I've been roaming around various battlefields. I've used the martial techniques you taught me to secretly absorb the scattered murderous aura, then digesting and controlling it according to the method you taught me. For the past 3 years, senior brother has been cultivating without a trace, so I haven't seen you. Some time ago, I learned that senior brother had appeared in Bretel City, so I specially rushed over. When Balins faced Han Shua, his expression was respectful and his attitude humble. He was even more attentive than when he served his former master, Karel. Han Shua knew that this was because he could give him something that Karel could never give him. However, 3 years had passed. From the thick and restrained aura on Balin's body, Han Shua could be sure that his cultivation of the god-slaying devil path had been fruitful. Compared to his strength as a great swordmaster in the past, the current Balins had become quite terrifying. Follow me. Han Shua nodded and instructed Balins. He went straight to the city lord's mansion. When they arrived at a training field in the city lord's mansion, Han Shua stomped his feet and looked at Balins. He instructed, "Attack me with all your strength. Let me see your progress in the past 3 years." Yes. Balins slowly unsheathed the long sword on his body inch by inch. A thick, murderous aura was gradually released, just like the unsheathed sword in his hand. As the long sword was unsheathed inch by inch, the murderous aura on his body grew sharper and stronger. Faintly, an abnormal crazed look appeared in Balins's eyes. The god-slaying devil path was a pure demonic art of slaughter. The deeper one was immersed in this aspect, the more terrifying the murderous aura would be once it leaked out. It could even affect the cultivator's body. Han Shuo had a deep understanding of the god-slaying devil path. The reason why he taught Balins was so that Balins could become another sharp sword in his hand. Now that he saw the crazed look in Balins' eyes, Han Shuo was not alarmed. Instead, he was delighted. He understood that Balins' cultivation of the god-slaying devil path was progressing well. Under Han Shuo's watchful eyes, Balins unsheathed the long sword in his hand inch by inch. At the same time, a terrifying murderous aura, so sharp that it seemed to be able to tear the air apart, suddenly erupted from Balins' body. Hundreds and thousands of sword shadows were like pythons spitting out sharp murderous aura. They were as soft as silk as they entangled Han Shuo. Han Shuo opened his left hand. Demonic yuan circulated and condensed into a ghostly face. Initially, the ghostly face was only the size of a palm. However, when Balins' hundreds and thousands of sword shadows were pushed forward by the murderous aura, the ghostly face had already blotted out the sky and covered the earth. It suddenly opened its bloody mouth and swallowed all of Balins' sword shadows. The fingers of Han Shuo's left hand were twisted into the shape of a hook. It was as if thousands of invisible threads were connected to the ghostly face. The movements of his fingers manipulated the ferocious might of the ghostly face, causing the ghostly face to sweep through the air towards Balins like a hungry wolf pouncing on its prey. Before Balins could react, the ghostly face had already swallowed Balins whole with its bloody mouth. While Balins was in a state of panic, the ghostly face suddenly exploded and vanished completely in the blink of an eye. It was as if everything that had just happened was just an illusion. Only Han Shuo remained unruffled, standing where he was with a faint smile on his face. After waking up from his panic, the crazed look in Balins' eyes gradually disappeared. He respectfully kowtowed towards Han Shuo and said, "Senior's martial arts have indeed reached the acme of perfection. Very good. To be able to progress to this stage in just 3 years, this shows that you have worked hard." From Balins' previous attack, Han Shuo understood that Han Shuo's strength had improved rapidly. By profound continent standards, the current Han Shuo should be able to contend against a newly advanced sacred swordsman. "Master, you have returned?" Suddenly, Elizabeth's voice sounded from afar. After a short while, Elizabeth appeared before Han Shuo. "Senior, what was that martial technique just now? Was that malevolent ghostly face real or fake?" Balins was extremely interested in Han Shuo's previous attack and paid no attention to Elizabeth. He only stared at Han Shuo and asked, "That was formed using demonic yuan. Hee. As for whether it's real or fake, you can figure it out yourself. When your control of killing intent reaches a certain realm, you will also be able to condense killing intent. At that time, you will understand," Han Shuo explained smilingly. He paused for a moment and suddenly approached Balins. Before Balins could react, Han Shuo suddenly pressed his hand on Balins' head. Some basic knowledge regarding demonic arts flowed from Han Shuo's palm into Balins' head. When his demonic arts had reached the separate demonic realm, Han Shuo could separate memories. Now, it was incomparably easy. The demonic arts knowledge that Han Shuo had poured into Balins' mind was only the most common knowledge of demonic arts practitioners, such as the theory of chi deviation, some of the wondrous abilities of demonic arts practitioners, and some of the drawbacks of mental cultivation. This knowledge was something that every demonic arts practitioner should understand. Han Shuo was worried that Balins would be too eager for quick results and not understand the rules of demonic arts training, falling into an inextricable state of madness. Therefore, he had imparted this basic knowledge to him, lest he lose control of himself and turn into a monster that only knew how to kill. "All right, comprehend this knowledge well." Han Shuo stopped and looked at Balins. "Thank you, Senior. I will never forget Senior's great kindness." "I know that with Master's help, our tribe of dark dragons will definitely be able to avert the danger," Gilbert said hastily. "Balins, follow Dorcas in secret and temporarily protect him in place of Gilbert. Elizabeth, you stay in the city and assist Dick in taking care of Bretel City's safety." Han Shuo instructed the two. Logically speaking, Han Shuo shouldn't be running around in the face of a great battle. However, the relationship between Dark Dragon Gilbert and Han Shuo wasn't as simple as that of a master and servant. Now that the Dark Dragon tribe was facing a calamity, and with Gilbert pleading like this, Han Shuo really couldn't find an excuse to refuse. Fortunately, the guardian god of the Seven Grand Duchies, Old Monster Statholm, couldn't even protect himself and wouldn't appear in the Seven Grand Duchies during this period of time. In addition, Statholm had made an agreement with Han Shuo beforehand. The absence of Han Shuo, who was an adept at leading troops, didn't seem to have much of an impact on the overall situation in a large-scale battle of this scale. Therefore, after making his decision, Han Shuo immediately summoned Dorcas, Jack, and the others and explained a few things in detail. "My lord, don't worry. With the full support of the Empire, as well as the secret support of the Helen Duchy and Bullet Duchy, I have the confidence to take down the Seven Grand Duchies." Dorcas was full of confidence. The light of ambition in his eyes wasn't concealed in the slightest in front of Han Shuo. "You brat, you're not in Breadel City all year round. Actually, Breadel City can still function without you." Jack was the only one in Breadel City who dared to speak so carelessly to Han Shuo. Han Shuo was speechless. He immediately flew into a rage out of humiliation and said, "You damned little fatty, if you can't bring up Breadel City's economy, I definitely won't let you off. Heh, look at how prosperous Breadel City is now in my hands. You won't have a chance." Jack laughed proudly. "Oh, right." Han Shuo suddenly thought of something and immediately instructed Dorcas, when attacking the Seven Grand Duchies, treat the people of each duchy well. Don't kill the innocent. "Don't worry, my lord. I know what to do," Dorcas assured. "Then I'm relieved." Han Shuo glanced at the anxious Dark Dragon Gilbert and said, "Let's go. I'll go with you to the underground world." You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.